Chapter 326. On the round stage, the six of them held their swords close to their eyebrows. Sword intent flowed out from their bodies, and on the ground of the round stage, countless sword lights gathered. Immortal slaying sword array. This was the array that the Firmament Sword Master left for the Firmament Sword Sect to protect themselves. It was also the strongest trump card of the Firmament Sword Sect. Originally they didn't want to use it, but this white-haired man's strength was too strong. If they didn't use it now, they might not have the chance to use it again. In the air, the white-haired man had his right hand behind his back. He was expressionless, and in his palm, a wave of energy was gathering. On the other side, Supreme Lu and the others had already retreated to the side. Actually, they didn't want to summon this white-haired man, because this was what they prepared to deal with the mysterious woman. Unfortunately, Lin Songyun and Qin Wenyan were protecting Yi Xian, so they had no choice but to use this trump card. It could be said that both sides had already used their trump cards. At this moment, although this white-haired man seemed to have crushed the Firmament Sword Sect, Supreme Lu still felt uneasy, because the mysterious woman still hadn't appeared. The feeling that woman gave him was too terrifying. But now that woman still hadn't appeared. This was what he was most uneasy about. Not far away, Lin Songyun and Qin Zhen's expressions were ugly. Obviously, the two of them didn't expect this white-haired man's strength to be so terrifying. After a moment of silence, Lin Songyun said solemnly, "The Realm Defense Alliance is determined to kill him. We must inform the higher-ups, otherwise that kid will die in this world." Qin Zhen said solemnly, "You go back." Lin Songyun shook his head, "You go back, I will stay here to protect him." Qin Zhen wanted to say something, but Lin Songyun shook his head, "Don't waste time. Quickly go." Qin Zhen looked at Lin Songyun, "Be careful. I will return as soon as possible." Finishing, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon. 1 month. Lin Songyun looked at the horizon with a hint of worry in his eyes. From Spirit Void Star Palace to here, they used a month's time. And if Qin Zhen went back and brought more people here, that meant it would take at least 2 months. 2 months' time. Lin Songyun glanced at the white-haired man in the sky. This white-haired man was only a clone. If the main body appeared here, there was no way they could fight against him. Lin Songyun shook his head and sighed. No matter what, he could only try his best. Below, on the round platform, 6 illusory swords of light had condensed above the heads of the 6 people. On the round platform, the 6 people's sword intents had also condensed into one. The 6 sword intents merged together. After a moment of silence, Qin Beihan suddenly shouted angrily, "Attack!" As soon as they finished speaking, the 6 of them pointed their fingers toward the sky. So. The 6 illusory swords above the heads of the 6 people suddenly transformed into a sword light and shot into the sky, slashing straight at the white-haired man. Wherever the 6 sword lights passed, the space was directly torn apart. In the air, the white-haired man was expressionless. He suddenly loosened his right hand, and in the next moment he slammed it down. Rumble. The entire sky shook violently, and countless people instantly felt dizzy. In midair, a formidable force directly pressed down upon the 6 sword lights, and in next to no time numerous terrifying waves of air ceaselessly shook out towards the surroundings. Below them, countless buildings in the Blue Sword Sect started to collapse inch by inch, and it wasn't just that, even the ground started to crack open at this moment. Just at this moment, the 6 sword lights in the sky suddenly collapsed and transformed into sword chi that shot out in all directions. Defeated. In the distance, Yi Xian slowly clenched his right hand. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in his mind, "Leave immediately. Run as far as you can." It was Yu Qi's voice. Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the round platform nearby. At this moment, Yu Qi's face was pale, and blood flowed endlessly from the corner of his mouth. Yi Xian shook his head. How could he leave at a time like this? Moreover, he couldn't leave, because the white-haired man definitely wouldn't let him go. The white-haired man wanted to destroy the Pale Sword Sect, and he wanted to kill him as well. In the air, the white-haired man glanced at Qin Beihan and the others. The immortal slaying sword formation. Not bad. If I'm not wrong, the sword intent left behind by your Pale Sword Sect's founding ancestor is below the round platform. Unfortunately, you can't draw it out, right? On the round platform, Qin Beihan looked at the white-haired man. If you have the founding ancestor's sword, you can draw out his sword intent and this clone of yours will be destroyed instantly. The white-haired man smiled. Unfortunately, you don't have it. In the distance, Yi Xian was stunned, and then he hurriedly flew to the round platform. I have it. Yu Qi appeared in front of him and said angrily, I told you to leave, so leave. Qin Beihan nodded slightly. We'll do our best to hold him back later. At that time, find an opportunity to escape. If you're not strong enough in the future, don't show yourself. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly took out a sword. The exquisite sword. To be more precise, it was the Firmament Thunder Sword, the sword of the founding ancestor of the Pale Sword sect. Everyone on the round platform was stunned when they saw this sword. Obviously they recognized this sword. Why are you, at the side? Zhan Tai looked at Yi Xian in disbelief. Why do you have the founding ancestor's sword? Qin Beihan and the others were also shocked. They didn't expect Yi Xian to have the Firmament Sword Master's sword. Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. It's a long story. Qin Beihan nodded slightly. Let's not talk about this first. Saying that, he looked at Yi Xian. You use this sword and draw out all the sword intent in this sword formation. Saying that, he looked at Yu Qi and the others. Begin. The 6 of them returned to their positions and Yi Xian stood in the middle. Qin Beihan suddenly shouted angrily, Begin! Boom! An illusory huge sword instantly condensed above the heads of the 6 of them. At the same time, the sword intent of the 6 of them appeared on the round platform, and the exquisite sword in Yi Xian's hand started to tremble violently. Not only the sword in his hand, but the entire round platform also started to tremble crazily as if something was about to come out. In the air, the white-haired man frowned slightly. He clenched his right hand slowly and a wave of energy silently condensed in his palm. At this moment, Qin Beihan suddenly shouted angrily, Gather! As soon as he shouted, the 6 swords condensed above the heads of the 6 of them. At this moment, a powerful sword intent gathered towards Yi Xian like a flood. The sword intent didn't enter his body, but gathered into the exquisite sword in his hand. Buzz! The sound of a sword suddenly resounded through the sky. Yi Xian's entire body was trembling. At this moment, he felt that the sword in his hand contained boundless power. At this moment, he had a kind of confidence, a confidence that he could split the heavens with one sword. At the side, Qin Beihan suddenly looked at him and shouted angrily, Attack! Yi Xian stabbed towards the sky, and the sword in his hand transformed into a sword light that shot into the sky. At this moment, the exquisite sword had far surpassed the heaven grade under the enhancement of the sword intent of the Firmament World Sword Master. This sword pierced through the sky. Seeing how terrifying this sword was, the expressions of Lord Lu and the others instantly turned solemn. In the air, the white-haired man squinted his eyes and suddenly disappeared. In the next moment, an afterimage descended from the sky, and when he arrived in front of the sword, he slapped down with his palm. The moment the palm and the sword came into contact, the heavens and earth shook violently. Rumble. Below, the round platform suddenly collapsed, and countless sword lights shot out in all directions. At the same time, the entire Ashenward Peak started to collapse, and the surroundings were in a mess. Everyone raised their heads to look at the white-haired man in the air. At this moment, the white-haired man stood silently in the air. He was expressionless as if nothing had happened. However, a trace of uneasiness arose in the hearts of Lord Lu and the others. In the air, the white-haired man looked down at Yi Xian. Why do you have his sword? On the round platform, Yi Xian grinned. Take a guess. The white-haired man stared at Yi Xian. Don't worry, you'll die for sure. As soon as he finished speaking, his body gradually became illusory. At the sight of this, everyone from the Pale Sword sect heaved a sigh of relief. As for the Realm Defense Alliance, their expressions sank. That sword strike had actually destroyed this clone. Just as the clone was about to completely dissipate, the white-haired man suddenly spoke. Yi Xian. Just you wait. As soon as he finished speaking, he completely disappeared in the air. On the other side, Lord Lu and the others quietly retreated. Qin Beihan and the others didn't stop them because they couldn't stop the other party now unless they wanted to fight to the death. After the Realm Defense Alliance and the others retreated, the surrounding experts also retreated. The Pale Sword sect had won. Very quickly, this news swept through the entire Divine Central Continent like a plague. All the powers were shocked. Obviously, they hadn't expected that the Pale Sword sect would win. After all, the Realm Defense Alliance was still the #1 power in the firmament world. Moreover, they'd mobilized so many experts this time. However, the Pale Sword sect had won. It was extremely dramatic. On the other hand, the expressions of everyone within the Pale Sword sect were solemn. Because they knew that this victory was only temporary. Because the Realm Defense Alliance would definitely make a comeback. At that time, it might not be a clone, but the white-haired man's main body. A clone was already so terrifying, so if the main body descended, would the Pale Sword sect be able to resist it? Within Cloud's Word Hall. All the important figures of the Pale Sword sect were within the hall, and Jian Xian was there as well. All of them were looking at Yi Xian. They were all waiting for Yi Xian's answer. Because Yi Xian possessed the Firmament Sword Master Sword, and they were extremely curious about this matter. Within the hall, Yi Xian fell silent for a long time before he said, "I just obtained the Founding Ancestor's sword by chance." He didn't continue when he spoke up to hear. Qin Beihan glanced at Yi Xian and said softly, "Since you don't want to say more, then we won't force you. However, the Founding Ancestor's sword in your hands might be the will of the heavens. From this moment onwards, you're the next sect master of my Pale Sword sect." Yi Xian suddenly shook his head. "Sect master, I'm not interested in the position of sect master." Qin Beihan smiled. "If you become the sect master, then you can obtain anything in the sect at any time." Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Then I'll consider it." Everyone was speechless. P.S. Happy Lantern Festival. Aren't you curious about what's in the box that Xiaolinger obtained? Let me see if there's a god. Chapter 327. Everyone in the hall shook their heads and smiled when they heard Yi Xian's words. Soon everyone left. Only Jian Xian and Qin Beihan were left in the hall. Qin Beihan looked at Jian Xian and smiled. "Eldest senior brother, I didn't expect that you would break through to the Great Sword Immortal level after leaving the sect for so many years." Jian Xian shook his head. "Half a step and you will be stuck there forever." Qin Beihan nodded. "The higher you go, the harder it is." Then he seemed to have thought of something and asked, "What about that young man?" Jian Xian was silent for a moment and then said, "His character is not suitable to be the sect leader." Qin Beihan shook his head. "This time, I have the opposite opinion from senior brother." Jian Xian looked at Qin Beihan and the latter smiled. "I have already investigated. This person is the Dean of Blue Waves Academy in Qingzhou, and that academy is well managed by him. Although this person's character is a little extreme and irritable, that's only towards enemies. He's still very loyal to his own people." Then he paused and said, "As for his extreme character, as long as he is strong enough, these problems are not a problem." Jian Xian looked at Qin Beihan. "His character is similar to mine. Aren't you afraid?" Qin Beihan shook his head. "Previously I also thought that his character is similar to yours. But in the end I found that in fact they are very different. First, he is not inflexible. He knows how to adapt to changing circumstances. Sometimes not only is he shameless but he also plays dirty. In other words, he is very black-bellied. Second." Then he looked at Jian Xian. "We need someone who can control both the inside and the outside world." Hearing this, Jian Xian was silent. In any sect or force, the leader must be able to control the people below. And now besides Yi Xian there is only Shangyu and Shangyu in Blue Sword sect. Shangyu can control both the inside and the outside world. And Yi Xian can not only control both the inside and the outside world. At this time, Qin Beihan suddenly smiled. "Actually, there is one more thing. He doesn't care about the position of sect leader." Then he shook his head and smiled. "If this person doesn't die young, his future will not be in Blue Sword sect." Jian Xian was silent for a moment and then stood up. "You decide." With that he turned around and left the hall. Inside the hall, Qin Beihan sighed softly. No one knew what he was thinking. Cloud's Word Hall. After Yi Xian returned to the Cloudy Sword Hall, Lin Songyun followed. Only Yi Xian and Lin Songyun were in the hall, while Yu Qi was in the inner hall. In front of Yi Xian, Lin Songyun said in a low voice, "Are you really not coming with me?" Once the crisis was over, he hoped to bring Yi Xian away from the Azure Firmament world. If Yi Xian was willing to leave, he was confident that he could bring Yi Xian back to the Spirit Void Star Palace. It was extremely difficult to chase after someone in the vast starry sky. Yi Xian shook his head. "Senior, I also want to see her, but I really can't leave now. Right now, the crisis of the Pale Sword sect had yet to be resolved. Moreover, he still had many things to do." Lin Songyun sighed in a low voice. "If you stay here, I do not dare to guarantee your safety." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Is she all right?" Lin Songyun smiled bitterly. "Of course she's fine. It's just that her temper, it's hard to explain." He would never forget the scene of the plain-dressed woman's first day at the Spirit Void Star Palace. Domineering. The feeling the plain-dressed woman gave him was domineering, incomparably domineering. Moreover, she was unreasonably strong. Hearing Lin Songyun's words, the domineering side of the plain-dressed woman appeared in Yi Xian's mind. It had to be said that her temper was truly explosive. Back then, she had wanted to destroy the Azure Firmament world with a single sword strike. At this moment Lin Songyun said softly, "Since you don't want to leave now, then I'll accompany you in this world for a while. I've already sent Qingjin back. At most, in a month and a half, the experts of my Spirit Void Star Palace will arrive here." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Can you beat them?" Lin Songyun smiled. "Do you know how big the world is?" Yi Xian shook his head. Lin Songyun pointed upwards, then said, "The vast universe is boundless. In the depths of this vast universe, there are star fields, and within these star fields, there are countless worlds. Some of these worlds have life and some don't. And my Spirit Void Star Palace controls the Spirit Void Star Field, which is at least a dozen times larger than your star field." A dozen times larger. Yi Xian's heart trembled and he asked again, "Then this azure firmament world I'm in is actually very small, right?" Lin Songyun smiled. "Of course it's very small." Saying this he said softly, "Actually, the stronger you become, the more you will realize how small you are. Because as you become stronger, you will come into contact with even more things. Before I met her, my Spirit Void Star Palace was already the overlord of that star field. In the Spirit Void Star Field, we could be said to be an invincible existence. Yet, with one sword strike she almost destroyed us." Saying this he shook his head. "People always have to lower themselves at all times. You may be strong, but there will always be people stronger than you." Hearing this, Yi Xian was a bit moved. He had seen a lot of experts before. The strongest was none other than the plain-clothed woman, and the plain-clothed woman had never attacked him. Thus, when he faced the plain-clothed woman, he did not feel any sense of helplessness. But when facing the white-haired man, he had felt a deep sense of helplessness. Facing this kind of expert he could not do anything. If it wasn't for the pale sword sect sword formation, all of them would have died. At this time Lin Songyun seemed to know what Yi Xian was thinking and he smiled. "Don't underestimate yourself. It's already very rare for you to reach this level at such a young age. You have to know that that person has cultivated for at least thousands of years. If you were given that much time you wouldn't be weaker than him, right?" Yi Xian thought about it and then grinned. "That's true. Actually, I'm still very outstanding." Lin Songyun. A moment later Lin Songyun left. Inside the hall only Yi Xian was left. At this time Yu Qi walked out. She glanced at Yi Xian. "Go to consecutive brush peak." Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he asked, "Why?" Yu Qi said indifferently, "Nangong is senior brother Lian's disciple." Yi Xian was silent. Yu Qi walked in front of him. "Nangong betrayed the sect, it was his fault. You killing him is also not wrong. But, do you understand what I mean?" Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." Yu Qi nodded. "Being a person is often more important than cultivating." With that, she turned and returned to the inner hall. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian left Cloudy Sword Hall and came to Consecutive Brush Peak. Inside Consecutive Brush Peak Hall, Lian Bixin glanced at Yi Xian. "What's the matter?" Yi Xian bowed slightly. "I met Nangong Shangyue before. Nangong doesn't give me the feeling that he's a despicable person. Why would he?" Lian Bixin glanced at Yi Xian. "Under jealousy, do you understand?" "Jealousy?" Yi Xian was silent. Lian Bixin said softly, "What's the scariest? Being unable to see others do well is the scariest. All these years he's been suppressed by Shangyu. And after you came he was suppressed by you again. Suppressed by Shangyu, there's still a day when he can stand out. At least he thinks that if he works hard he has a chance to surpass Shangyu. But for you?" Saying this, he glanced at Yi Xian. "For you he can't see such hope. You're so outstanding that even the older generation blushes with shame." Yi Xian lowered his head. "I've never thought so much." Lian Bixin shook his head. "It's not your fault. I've been negligent all these years." Saying this, he looked at Yi Xian. "If you become the sect leader in the future, you must remember this. It's impossible for a person to not make mistakes in life. Many times if a disciple makes a mistake as the sect leader, you shouldn't just kill him. You should give him a chance to turn over a new leaf." Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." He knew that the person in front of him still held a grudge. After all, Nangong was nurtured by the other party. He must have feelings for him. Lian Bixin nodded. "Go back. Tell junior sister that I'm a person who distinguishes between good and evil. If he's right, he's right. If he's wrong, he's wrong. It's Nangong's fault for sneaking up on you. It's understandable for you to kill him. I won't have any other thoughts." Yi Xian bowed slightly, then turned around and left. In the hall, Lian Bixin closed his eyes slowly. After a long time he shook his head and sighed. "Silly." After leaving Lian Bishan Peak, Yi Xian walked towards Weapon Forging Peak. Actually, he didn't regret killing Nangong. Because if it wasn't for his special cultivation technique, Nangong's sword would have taken his life. When Nangong chose to be his enemy, their past friendship naturally vanished. Towards his enemies, Yi Xian would never be merciful. Not long later, Yi Xian arrived at Weapon Forging Peak. Zhang Tai glanced at Yi Xian and said directly, "I don't have any treasures here. Go look elsewhere." Yi Xian's face darkened. "Am I that kind of person? Am I?" Yi Xian didn't say anything. He took out 100 purple source crystals and placed them in front of Zhang Tai. In the previous battle, Martial Uncle was invincible and exhausted too much of your Shen Qi. These purple source crystals are a small token of my appreciation. I hope Martial Uncle will accept it. Zhang Tai glanced at the purple source crystals before looking at Yi Xian. "What do you mean exhausted too much Shen Qi? Can't you just say that I'm seriously injured?" Yi Xian chuckled and turned to run. In the cave, Zhang Tai looked at the 100 purple source crystals for a long time. In the end, he shook his head with a smile and kept the purple source crystals. After leaving Weapon Forging Peak, Yi Xian went to the other peaks. He was left with less than 200 purple source crystals. Of course, he didn't feel any heartache. An hour later, Yi Xian returned to Cloud's Word Peak. There was one more person in Cloud's Word Hall. It was Martial Uncle Gu from Array Dao Peak. Since Array Dao Peak was destroyed, she was here to stay temporarily. The first thing Martial Uncle Gu said to Yi Xian was, "Go cook." Yi Xian, nightfall. Yi Xian sat at the entrance of Cloud's Word Hall and took out a voice transmission talisman. After a while, Yi Xian kept the talisman and said softly, "There are some things that I should do." /11 under. Chapter 328. Following the retreat of the Realm Defense Alliance, Azure World experienced a rare moment of peace. Of course, everyone knew that this was the calm before the storm. Cloud's Word Peak. Cultivate. Yi Xian entered a frenzied cultivation mode. He was already at the true Imperial Spell Realm. In terms of cultivation realm, there was no way he could improve in a short period of time. In terms of sword Dao, he could only rely on opportunities and enlightenment. What he could cultivate now was sword skills. He did not know many sword skills now. He only knew one sword to determine life and death, one sword to determine soul, 10 feet kill, and instant space. These few sword skills were extremely threatening to true Imperial Spell Realm experts. However, now that he had reached the true Imperial Spell Realm, it meant that he could improve these sword skills again. Especially one sword to determine life and death. This sword skill was not just a sword skill to him, it was also a direction. The mysterious woman left him a direction for sword Dao. Every time he thought of this sword skill, he would think of one word: confidence. Whether it was cultivation or fighting, one must have confidence in oneself. Of course, one had to control the limit. Otherwise, one would be conceited. If a person was conceited, he would definitely play himself to death. At the back of the mountain of Cloud's Word Peak, Yi Xian sat on the ground with a sword floating in front of him. His sword intent was everywhere. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm. The next moment, rays of sword light appeared around him. These sword lights seemed to appear out of thin air and surrounded him. Instant space. This was the only sword skill that he had cultivated in Pale Sword Sect. However, Yi Xian realized that this sword skill had a lot of room for improvement. Previously, he had used this move to kill the true defense Dharma Realm expert in an instant. Only by using this move could he kill a true defensive Magic Realm expert in an instant without making a sound. He realized that after reaching the true Imperial Spell Realm, he was more adept at using the Space Dao Law. Excavating the Space Dao Law and using it to strengthen instant space. That was his goal now. Yi Xian waved his right hand. In an instant, the surrounding sword lights dispersed. Not far away stood two women. It was Senior Uncle Gu and Yu Qi. Yu Qi said softly, "This instant space sword of his is already completely different from before." As she spoke, she looked at Uncle Master Gu beside her. "Shaoxian, can you tell what has changed?" Gu Shaoxian glanced at Yi Xian in the distance and said softly, "Ghost." This instant space sword was cultivated by him into an assassin's move. Yu Qi nodded. "If I'm not wrong, the person who secretly killed the Realm Protection Alliance should be him." Gu Shaoxian nodded. "It should be him." As she spoke, she glanced at Yi Xian, who was not far away. "He's talented and has a good character, but he's too thick-skinned." "Thick skin." Yu Qi nodded in agreement. "Very thick. My Azure Sword Sect swordsman is unparalleled." Gu Shaoxian said softly, "It's not necessarily a bad thing. At the very least, you won't be at a disadvantage." As she spoke, she glanced at Yu Qi. Cultivation is cultivation, but cooking is still cooking. Make sure he doesn't forget later. As she spoke, she turned and left. Yu Qi nodded. That makes sense. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian, who was not far away. Wait for me to cook. As she spoke, she turned and left. Yi Xian was speechless. Several days passed. Yi Xian had increased the power of his sword technique by at least one level. Now, if he were to encounter those golden-robed experts again, he would not be in such a sorry state. Even if he could not win, he would not be in such a sorry state. Especially the instant space sword. If he were to hide now, he had an 80% chance of assassinating the opponent. 80% chance. It could be said that he was full of confidence. That was because his current instant space sword could be said to be truly undetectable. And he had gained a lot from the previous battle. Because from that battle, he'd noticed that he had too many inadequacies. A moment later, the space Dao Law suddenly condensed between Yi Xian's eyebrows. Now, what he had to do was condense the space Dao Law sword. If he were to encounter the left and right protectors now, he would be utterly unable to resist them. But if he condensed the space sword, then he was definitely confident in his ability to fight them. Even though Lin Songyun had asked Qin Zhen to return and get help, Yi Xian had to become stronger regardless of whether he had help or not. It was still the same saying, one must rely on oneself. In the past, he hadn't dared to condense the space Dao Law before he had attained the true defense law realm. But now that he had attained the true defense law realm, he could control space. The space around Yi Xian had started to tremble, and it rippled like the surface of a river being blown by the wind. In next to no time, strands of space energy seeped out incessantly from the surroundings, and it didn't take long for the tip of a sword to appear in front of Yi Xian. The tip of the sword was transparent like water. On the other hand, cold sweat was gradually trickling down Yi Xian's forehead. It was slightly strenuous. Even at the true defense law realm, he noticed that it was still slightly strenuous for him when the space energy appeared. However, he could still persist. Yi Xian pressed his palms together, steadied his mind, and then continued to utilize the space Dao Law. It didn't take long for more and more space energy to appear. At the same time, the tip of the sword in front of him was gradually condensing into a sword. Yi Xian was delighted when he witnessed this scene. But it was this delight that caused his mind to relax, and in an instant, rumble. With Yi Xian at the center, the surroundings shook violently. Blood instantly flowed out of Yi Xian's 7 apertures. Moreover, his entire body spun like a top, and this continued for around 15 minutes before he finally stopped. As soon as he stopped, Yi Xian fell to the ground. Meanwhile, Yu Qi suddenly appeared in front of him, and her beautiful brows knit together slightly as she gazed at Yi Xian, who was on the ground. After that, she carried Yi Xian in her arms and brought Yi Xian back to Cloud's Word Hall. An hour later, Yi Xian woke up. At this moment, his head was still dizzy and it was extremely uncomfortable. Yi Xian shook his head and laughed bitterly. I was really careless this time. I can't be distracted at all while condensing the space Dao Law. What are you doing? Meanwhile, Yu Qi appeared by his bedside. Yi Xian laughed bitterly. Condensing a sword. Yu Qi said in a low voice, it's related to space? Yi Xian nodded. Yu Qi said seriously, the space Dao is extremely profound and even a true defensive Dharma realm expert only knows a little about it. It's extremely dangerous for you to utilize it. Do you understand? Yi Xian nodded. I was careless just now. Yu Qi shook her head. It wasn't carelessness, but you don't understand how terrifying the space energy is. If space shatters and forms a spatial turbulence, then you'll be instantly minced by the spatial turbulence with your current strength. Understand? Spatial turbulence? Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. Yu Qi nodded slightly. If space is forcibly torn open, then the torn space will be a spatial turbulence. This kind of turbulence is extremely terrifying, and even a true defensive Dharma realm expert will be smashed to pieces if he's caught in it. Speaking up to this point, she looked at Yi Xian and said seriously, if you don't have absolute confidence, don't force it again. What sword is that, understand? Yi Xian said with a smile, it's okay, I'm confident. I was just careless before. Yu Qi glanced at Yi Xian. If you want to condense it again, let me be by your side, understand? Yi Xian was just about to say no when Yu Qi suddenly said, understand? His voice was somewhat stern. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Okay. Yu Qi nodded slightly and turned to leave. The next day Yi Xian continued. But this time Yu Qi was by his side. Obviously, she was still a little worried about Yi Xian. Yi Xian did not hide it from Yu Qi and directly took out the space Dao Law. When he saw the space Dao Law between Yi Xian's eyebrows, Yuqi's expression suddenly turned solemn. Soon, countless spatial forces suddenly appeared around Yi Xian in the distance, and these spatial forces began to converge. The surrounding space was a little unstable. Yuqi slowly clenched her right hand, ready to attack at any time. In the distance, a sword tip quietly condensed in front of Yi Xian. This time Yi Xian did not dare to be distracted again and focused on activating the spatial forces. Although it was a little strenuous, it was not a big problem as long as he did not get distracted. About an hour later Yi Xian's face was covered in sweat, and his face was also a little pale. However, the spatial sword in front of him had condensed halfway. Only half of the sword body and hilt were missing. On the other side, Yuqi's expression was also extremely solemn. She was ready to attack at any time. In the distance, the space around Yi Xian suddenly began to tremble violently. At the same time, the surrounding spatial forces also increased, and the remaining half of the sword body began to condense. Yuqi got up and walked to within 10 feet of Yi Xian. She stared closely at Yi Xian and clenched her right hand tightly. It was obvious that the critical moment was approaching. In the prison pagoda, a tiny figure suddenly slipped out from the second floor. It was Xiaoling. Xiaoling flew outside and then began to climb to the top of the pagoda. She liked to stay at the top of the pagoda and soon she reached the top. The great god on the second floor was asleep. Then she could freely stroll around. She floated in front of the three swords and blinked. No one knew what she was thinking. Soon she suddenly hugged the sword in the middle and was about to pull it out, but at this moment she suddenly remembered Yi Xian's words. She let go of her hand and said softly, "He said I can't pull it out." After saying that, she turned and was about to go down the pagoda, but soon she stopped. She looked at the sword in the middle and bit her little finger, a little puzzled. But he didn't say which one I can't pull out. Can't pull out means I can't pull out one, but I can pull out two. After saying that, she giggled and floated in front of the three swords. She looked at the three swords, pausing on the rightmost sword for a while, but in the end she still looked at the sword in the middle. Her two little hands hugged the sword, a little excitement in her eyes. "Soon I can fly on the sword." After saying that, she suddenly exerted force. The sword trembled slightly. In the outside world, Yi Xian felt as if he had been struck by lightning, and his mind went blank. What happened? This was the last thought in Yi Xian's mind. P.S. Today the doctor said that I can be discharged after changing my medicine 2 more times. However, this diabetes and uremia, I have to slowly nurse it back to health. After being in the hospital for a month and a half, the biggest feeling I have is that health is the most important. Everyone who is working hard outside, please remember, health is the most important. May everyone in the world be healthy. /11 Chapter 329. The space around Yi Xian trembled violently as if it was about to shatter. Yuqi's expression changed drastically. She rushed in front of Yi Xian, but at this moment the surrounding spatial power blasted towards her. Bang! Yuqi was instantly blasted back hundreds of feet. The next moment, a sword suddenly appeared in Yuqi's hand. In the blink of an eye, she turned into a sword light and shot forward. Just like that, the sword light tore through the air and Yuqi forced her way to Yi Xian's side. Then she wrapped her right hand around Yi Xian's waist and disappeared. The place where Yi Xian was originally standing had been twisted into a strange vortex. Inside the world prison pagoda, Xiaoling at the top of the pagoda seemed to notice that something was wrong. She stopped, and at this moment, the second floor god suddenly appeared in front of her. She coldly looked at Xiaoling without saying a word. Xiaoling blinked, then covered her eyes, turned around and slowly crawled down. As she crawled, she said, "Can't see me, can't see me." At this moment, the second floor god suddenly grabbed her and disappeared from the top of the pagoda. Inside the clouds word hall. Yi Xian was lying on the bed, unconscious. Beside him were Yuqi and Gu Shaoxian. Yuqi looked at Yi Xian, frowning slightly. Her right arm was covered in cracks, which were caused by the spatial power just now. That spatial power was so strong that she still felt some lingering fear when she thought of it. At this moment, Gu Shaoxian suddenly said, "That power is difficult to control. Don't let him try for the time being." Yuqi shook her head. He almost succeeded. Something must have gone wrong. Gu Shaoxian said in a low voice, "It's very dangerous." Yuqi softly said, "He won't give up." Gu Shaoxian nodded slightly. "That's true, that guy is very stubborn." At this moment, Song Xian appeared in the hall. He glanced at the two girls and said, "Lian Bai Peak sect master has something to say." The two girls nodded. Soon the three of them left. An hour later Yi Xian woke up. The first thing Yi Xian did after waking up was enter the World Prison Pagoda. This was because he now knew that it was Xiao Linger who had done this. On the first floor, Xiao Linger was hiding in a corner facing the wall and squatting down. Her two small hands were hugging her calves and she was sobbing from time to time. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was stunned. He hadn't hit her yet. At this time, the second floor god appeared in front of him, but it was not his real body. The Almighty on the second floor glanced at Yi Xian. She can pull out the sword. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice, why? Why is she able to pull out the sword? In his opinion, this kind of sort of unknown rank was definitely not something that anyone could easily pull out. Otherwise, wouldn't it be too embarrassing? The second floor god shook her head. There are two possibilities. First, that sword can be pulled out by anyone. Second, she is special. Speaking of this, she seemed to have thought of something and looked at Yi Xian. Don't even think about those three swords. If she hadn't suddenly stopped just now, once the sword was pulled out, at least half of the seal in this pagoda would have broken instantly. At that time you would be the first to die. Yi Xian was silent. Because he knew that the second floor god was not trying to scare him. Once the seal in this pagoda was broken, who could stop those existences in the pagoda? Thinking of this, Yi Xian looked at Xiao Linger in the corner not far away and shook his head. This little girl was really too naughty. He walked behind Xiao Linger. Xiao Linger turned to look at him with tears in her eyes. She looked very wronged. Yi Xian was speechless. Why are you wronged? I was almost killed because of you just now. Xiao Linger bowed her head slightly. I didn't pull it out. Yi Xian looked a little stern. Didn't I tell you that the sword can't be pulled out? Beside him, the second floor god said lightly, she said you didn't let her pull out the sword, but she didn't say which one. So, she thinks that she can't pull out one sword but she can pull out two. Xiao Linger nodded quickly. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Could it be understood like this? A moment later, Yi Xian could not help but smile bitterly. Because he had discovered that this little girl's way of understanding and logic were different from that of ordinary people. She regarded herself as a human, but in fact, she was not a human. Her logic was half learned from humans and he didn't know where it came from. In short, she would think and act from the side that was beneficial to her. Xiao Linger glanced at Yi Xian and felt a little guilty. Will you hit me? Yi Xian shook his head and said seriously, why did you go to pull out the sword? Did the guy on the fourth floor ask you to go? Xiao Linger hesitated, then said, he said that with a sword, he can fly on a sword like you. It really was the fourth floor. Yi Xian looked up. This guy on the fourth floor was up to no good. He had to be careful. Recollecting his thoughts, Yi Xian took out a sword and handed it to Xiao Linger. If you have any questions or needs in the future, you can come to me directly. Understand? Xiao Linger grabbed the sword, her face full of a bright smile. Okay. Looking at Xiao Linger's bright smile, Yi Xian smiled slightly. In fact, he was not really angry because this little girl in front of him did not mean any harm. She was just a little playful. However, he needed to discipline her in the future. Otherwise, she might cause trouble in the future. After playing with Xiao Linger for a while, Yi Xian left the World Prison Pagoda and went to the back mountain again. Continue condensing. 2 hours later, a sword appeared in front of Yi Xian. The sword seemed to be condensed from water and it was transparent. The space around the sword was trembling. The spatial sword. Actually, he had already condensed it successfully, but Xiao Linger had ruined it. But that was not a problem. He was already familiar with how to condense it, so he had succeeded this time. Yi Xian's expression was solemn as he looked at the spatial sword. The sword contained extremely powerful spatial energy, and the power within it made even him feel slightly fearful. Yi Xian did not test the power of the sword because it would definitely cause a huge commotion if he did. Yi Xian put away the sword, and at this time he suddenly took out a sound transmission stone, and a familiar voice came from the stone. Yi Xian grinned, turned around and flew on his sword. Soon Yi Xian arrived at the foot of Pale Sword Sect's mountain. At the foot of Pale Sword Sect's mountain, he saw 3 familiar faces. It was Mo Yunqi, Bai Zhe and Jianji. Yi Xian walked in front of the 3 and gave them a big hug. These 3 people were called by him. At noon, Yi Xian left Pale Sword Sect with the 3 of them. In the air, the 4 of them flew on the wind. Mo Yunqi and Bai Zhe had reached the Myriad Law Realm, so the 2 of them could already fly on the wind. Yi Xian did not fly on his sword but flew with them. In the air, Mo Yunqi looked at Yi Xian. Bandit Yi, the brothers of the academy are waiting for you to summon them. Bai Zhe nodded. Our Blue Waves Academy's Dao soldiers as well as the subordinates of the 9th princess. Now their battle strength is definitely the first in Qingzhou. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, Don't be anxious. Now, the matter of Realm Protection Alliance had not been settled. If he summoned the students of Blue Waves Academy, Realm Protection Alliance would definitely not let Blue Waves Academy off. Mo Yunchi also nodded. Now is indeed not the time, but I want to tell you that the brothers are waiting for you. Yi Xian smiled. I know. Blue Waves Academy he naturally did not forget because this was what he promised Old Man Ji. Soon, the four of them arrived at the foot of a mountain, and on this mountain, there was an academy. Blue Waves Academy. This was the academy where Old Man Zeng stayed. Yi Xian looked up at the top of the mountain and said indifferently, Let's go. The four of them walked up the mountain, and at this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of the four of them. The middle-aged man coldly looked at Yi Xian and the others. Now is not the time to recruit students, come back next year. Yi Xian said indifferently, I am not here to study, I am here to see someone. Hearing this, the middle-aged man frowned. See who? Yi Xian turned to Jianji. What is the dean's master called? Jianji shook his head. He has never said. Yi Xian nodded slightly, then turned to the middle-aged man. Can I trouble you to inform that student Ji-yun is here? Ji-yun? The middle-aged man frowned. Is he that traitor? Traitor. Yi Xian's expression gradually turned cold. At this moment, the middle-aged man sneered. Don't waste your time. He is just a traitor of my Blue Waves Academy. You want to rely on his name to enter my Blue Waves Academy? It is simply a pipe dream. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared, and in the next moment, the middle-aged man's voice stopped abruptly. Because in between his eyebrows, there was a sword. You? The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian in shock. You? Yi Xian sheathed his sword. Go and report, say that Yi Xian is here to see someone. Yi Xian. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the middle-aged man's expression instantly changed. Now in Blue Firmament's world, who did not know Yi Xian? The current Yi Xian could be said to be the sun in the sky. The middle-aged man glanced at Yi Xian, his eyes filled with fear. Wait a moment. With that he turned around and left. Approximately 15 minutes later, an old man appeared in front of Yi Xian and the others. This person was Blue Firmament's Academy's Dean, Qiu Yuan. Qiu Yuan glanced at Yi Xian, his expression somewhat complicated. He naturally knew about Yi Xian and Ji Yun, and also knew that Yi Xian was Qingzhou Blue Firmament's Academy's Dean. And this person in front of him did not recognize Blue Firmament's Academy. Yi Xian cupped his fists. The four of us would like to see Dean Ji's master. I hope your excellency can grant our request. Ji Yun's master. Qiu Yuan nodded slightly. Sure. With that, he glanced at the four of them. He is in seclusion but should be out soon. Follow me. With Qiu Yuan leading the way, the four of them arrived in front of a stone cave. Qiu Yuan was about to leave, when at this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, I heard that Dean Ji was chased out, is that right? Qiu Yuan stopped in his tracks, looked at Yi Xian. Yes. Yi Xian said softly, I do not care about Blue Firmament's Academy but he does. So, I hope that Blue Firmament's Academy will restore his identity. Qiu Yuan narrowed his eyes. This is my Blue Firmament's Academy's internal affairs. Yi Xian said indifferently, I am untalented, I would like to seek advice from the younger generation of Blue Firmament's Academy. /11 Chapter 330. Causing Trouble. He's here to cause trouble. Qiu Yuan stared fixedly at Yi Xian. My Blue Waves Academy and Blue Sword Sect don't have any grudges. Yi Xian was expressionless. If there's no one in the younger generation of Blue Waves Academy, then I'd like to seek guidance from you. Qiu Yuan's expression instantly turned cold. Challenge him. Qiu Yuan looked at Yi Xian with an unsightly expression. If he fought with Yi Xian it would be fine if he won, but if he lost, then the reputation of Blue Waves Academy would be ruined. And if he won there would be no benefit and Yi Xian wouldn't lose face. But if Yi Xian won, in the end he didn't have the confidence to defeat Yi Xian. Because Yi Xian had already killed a true Imperial Law Realm expert in Blue Sword Sect, and he had done it very easily. Not to mention the younger generation, Yi Xian's strength was extremely strong even among the older generation. How dare you? At this moment an angry shout came from the side. Yi Xian, what qualifications do you have to challenge the dean? Yi Xian's group of four turned around and saw a young man in his 20s standing not far away. He wore a white robe. Qiu Yuan frowned when he saw this person. Stand down. The young man bowed slightly to Qiu Yuan, then he looked at Yi Xian and said angrily, Dean, this person is arrogant. Today I am willing to represent Blue Waves Academy and fight him. I will be responsible for my own life. Qiu Yuan looked coldly at the young man. I said stand down, didn't you hear me? The young man's expression was slightly unsightly. Dean, I'm not afraid of him, At this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, then bring it on. The young man charged directly at Yi Xian. Qiu Yuan's expression changed drastically when he saw this, and he was about to stop him. But in the distance, an arm flew out with a trail of blood. It was the young man's arm. The young man's forehead was pointed by a sword. Yi Xian. Qiu Yuan glared at Yi Xian. Don't go too far. Yi Xian said indifferently, going too far? Do you think I'm going too far? As he spoke, he shook his head slightly. If that's the case, then I'll go too far. As soon as he finished speaking, a strand of formidable sword intent suddenly swept out from within him, and Qiu Yuan's expression turned grim when he witnessed this scene. Yi Xian, what are you doing? He was obviously afraid of Yi Xian. Not only was Yi Xian's personal strength formidable, there was also another reason, and that was the Pale Sword sect behind Yi Xian. And now, Blue Sword sect had just won against Realm Protection Alliance. Now, Blue Waves Academy couldn't afford to offend Blue Sword sect. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from the side. Stop. As soon as the voice sounded, the mountain gate nearby opened and a gray-robed old man walked out. Yi Xian stopped and faced the gray-robed old man with Jianji's group of 4. The old man walked over to Yi Xian's group, glanced at Yi Xian's group and asked softly, You are little Yun students? Yi Xian nodded. You should be Principal Ji's teacher, right? The gray-robed old man nodded slightly. Yi Xian took 2 steps back and then said, Kneel. As soon as he finished speaking, the 4 of them knelt in unison in front of the gray-robed old man. Seeing this scene, Qiu Yuan and the others who were nearby were instantly stunned. Because the sword attack of Yi Xian had alarmed many people of Blue Waves Academy, many students and teachers of Blue Waves Academy had gathered in the surroundings at this moment. In front of Yi Xian's group of 4, the gray-robed old man was also slightly stunned. In the next moment, he hurriedly helped Yi Xian's group of 4 up, and his expression was somewhat complicated. There is no need for this. Yi Xian said softly, Principal Ji said that he has let you down, and that he was disappointing back then. He hopes that you will not be angry. The gray-robed old man shook his head slightly. It is all in the past. Yi Xian nodded. There is another reason why I am here, and that is, I hope. The gray-robed old man smiled. Hope that Blue Waves Academy will restore his identity? Yi Xian nodded. The gray-robed old man shook his head. There is no need. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. Why? The gray-robed old man smiled. I know his character. In fact, he already has no feelings for the academy, and he will not be happy to restore his identity. Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, I understand. The gray-robed old man glanced at Yi Xian's group of 4. No matter what enmity we have in the past, I hope that all of it will be forgotten, all right? Yi Xian fell silent for a moment and then he smiled, all right. The gray-robed old man smiled when he heard this. Very good. Yi Xian cupped his fists. Farewell. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left with Mo Yunqi's group of 3. Meanwhile, the gray-robed old man suddenly said, I heard that you established Blue Waves Academy in Azure Prefecture. Yi Xian stopped and nodded, yes. The gray-robed old man hesitated to speak. Yi Xian smiled. Are you trying to say that it shares the same name as Blue Waves Academy in the Central Divine Prefecture? The gray-robed old man nodded. Yi Xian turned to face the gray-robed old man and the others, and then he smiled. If I, Yi Xian, don't die, I will make Azure Prefecture's Blue Waves Academy the largest academy in the firmament world. I want everyone to know that the founding ancestor of Blue Waves Academy is Ji Yun. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and led Mo Yunqi's group of 4 away. Meanwhile, the expressions of Qiu Yuan and the others who stood behind Yi Xian's group were unsightly to the extreme. Because if Yi Xian didn't perish, then who would know about their Blue Waves Academy in the future? After all, Yi Xian's reputation was like the scorching sun in the midday sky, and he even had the support of the Blue Sword sect. Under such circumstances, if Yi Xian really intended to move Blue Waves Academy to the Central Divine Prefecture, then it could be said to be a lethal blow to Blue Waves Academy. Qiu Yuan's expression was gloomy, and no one knew what he was thinking. Meanwhile, the white-robed old man by his side spoke abruptly, Don't let your thoughts run wild. The Realm Defense Alliance might dare to touch him, but our Blue Waves Academy absolutely can't have any designs on him. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as simple as losing an arm today. Qiu Yuan gazed at the gray-robed old man, and the latter spoke indifferently, At that time little Yun came to our Blue Waves Academy for help, but we refused him and then he perished. Do you think these four little fellows aren't angry? Especially that Yi Xian. He said that he came to look for me today, but actually, isn't he here to fight for little Yun's honor? Qiu Yuan fell silent. The gray-robed old man shook his head and sighed. No matter what, our Blue Waves Academy can't have any disputes with him. As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something, and his eyes became slightly complicated. Actually, all four of them could be considered as students of Blue Waves Academy. If Blue Waves Academy had casually sent a few people to Azure Prefecture, then with Ji Yun's character, he would have definitely allowed these four little fellows to follow him back. And among these four people, besides Yi Xian, the other three were also geniuses among geniuses. Unfortunately, Blue Waves Academy had looked down on Azure Prefecture's Blue Waves Academy. Now, Blue Waves Academy's headquarters couldn't afford to associate with them. Thinking of this, the gray-robed old man sighed again and turned to leave. Yi Xian, Mo Yunqi and the rest returned to Blue Sword Sect. But this time Yi Xian didn't let the three of them return. Instead he let them go to Sky Cloud City. This was the biggest city in the Divine Central Continent. Development. In future, Blue Waves Academy would definitely develop vigorously. And if Blue Waves Academy came to the Divine Central Continent in future, they couldn't possibly not have a territory. Sky Cloud City, this was the place he had his eyes on. This city was now the territory of the Realm Protection Alliance, but it didn't matter, it wouldn't be in future. This was what Yi Xian said to Mo Yunqi and the other two. And this time Yi Xian didn't let the three of them leave empty-handed. Instead he let the three of them bring along 5 billion high-grade spirit stones. 5 billion high-grade spirit stones, they could do a lot of things. As for Yi Xian himself, he went to Gu Wu clan. Now that there was no movement from the Realm Protection Alliance, he had to complete many things. Dao Law. He had promised the great god on the second floor that he would let her out. After Yi Xian arrived at Gu Wu clan, the previous clan leader of Gu Wu clan was obviously a little unhappy. After bidding farewell to him, he left. Yi Xian didn't care. He found Wei Yang Tian. Seeing Yi Xian, Wei Yang Tian was incomparably happy, dragging him to various places of Gu Wu clan. On a tree branch, Yi Xian and Wei Yang Tian sat side by side. Not far in front of them was a crescent-shaped lake, like a bright moon. Yi Xian gently rubbed Wei Yang Tian's little head. How do you feel here? Wei Yang Tian hesitated for a moment, then said softly, They treat me very well, but I want to be with Big Brother. Yi Xian chuckled. Not for now. When I'm done with my business, I'll bring you out to play. How about that? Now that the Realm Protection Alliance was determined to get rid of him, it wouldn't be long before that mysterious lord appeared in front of him. At that time, thinking of this, Yi Xian shook his head slightly. His situation wasn't particularly good. Wei Yang Tian glanced at Yi Xian, then said softly, I can help you. Yi Xian looked at Wei Yang Tian, smiled. How? Wei Yang Tian raised her little fist, said seriously, I think I'm very powerful. Yi Xian asked with a smile, How powerful? Wei Yang Tian thought for a moment, then said, Very, very powerful. Yi Xian laughed. At this time, the voice of the second-floor great god suddenly sounded in his mind. Laugh? What are you laughing at? If you have the ability, fight her now. Fight? Yi Xian frowned, asked in his heart, Why? The second-floor great god said calmly, Won't you know if you try? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then landed on the ground with Wei Yang Tian. He said with a smile, Come, fight me. You have to use your full strength. Wei Yang Tian blinked. Why? Yi Xian smiled. Let's spar, understand? Wei Yang Tian thought for a moment, then said, Then I'll fight. Yi Xian smiled. Come on. Wei Yang Tian looked at Yi Xian, then took a step forward, then punched at Yi Xian. This punch, there was no movement, it was a very calm punch. Yi Xian shook his head with a smile, he casually blocked in front of him, but when Wei Yang Tian's punch came into contact with his palm, his face instantly changed. Bang! Without any warning, Yi Xian flew thousands of feet away in an instant. On the ground, Yi Xian's body trembled, then directly fainted. At this time, an exclamation suddenly sounded from the prison pagoda. Reincarnation power. Pity, I only used 40% of my strength. If I used a few more, this guy would be dead. Pity. It was not the second-floor great god's voice. P.S. When I talked to someone today, he said that all my readers are lazy otakus. But I feel that some of my readers are quite coquettish, they don't seem like otakus at all. Some of them are quite shameless, and some of them will bring me to the great treasure sword. /11_. Chapter 331. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian woke up. At this moment he was lying on a wooden bed. Beside the bed was Wei Yangtian. She was sprawled at the head of the bed, apparently asleep. Yi Xian rubbed his head with both hands. Soon he recalled what had happened. A punch. He was almost killed by Wei Yangtian's soft punch. Why was that? Yi Xian was completely puzzled. He couldn't figure it out, so he asked the second-floor guru. A moment later the second-floor guru said calmly, "Her power is a special kind of power. In short, it's very strong. Do you understand?" Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "What special power?" The second-floor guru said coldly, "Think about it yourself." Yi Xian was speechless. What was this second-floor guru up to this time? At this moment, Wei Yangtian raised her head. When she saw that Yi Xian was awake, she grabbed Yi Xian's hand and said nervously, "Brother." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. He had to admit that it was a little embarrassing, because he was almost killed by a punch. Shaking his head, Yi Xian smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'm fine now." Saying that, he paused for a moment and then asked, "That punch of yours, why was it so strong?" Wei Yangtian looked at her little fist and shook her head. "I don't know. I only know that not long ago I felt like a dormant power in my body awakened." Saying that, she looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "I don't dare to tell others, only you." "Dormant power." Yi Xian said solemnly, "Do you feel any other discomfort?" Wei Yangtian shook her head. "No, it's just that the power is getting stronger and stronger." Yi Xian gently rubbed Wei Yangtian's little head, a little worried. This little girl was too extraordinary. At this moment, the second-floor guru's voice sounded again, "Don't worry about her. Hurry up and find the Tao Law." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "I felt the Tao Law here before, but now, search?" The second-floor guru said, "The Tao Law must be here in the ancient Wu clan." Yi Xian thought about it and nodded. "Then let's look around." After resting for a while, Yi Xian played with Wei Yangtian for a while and then began to wander around the ancient Wu clan. Now he could wander around as he pleased because the Wu clan leader was Wei Yangtian. He could even go to the clan's forbidden area. Not only the ancient Wu clan, but there was also of Yangtian of Yi Xian of the ancient Wu clan. But he had of time Yi Xian of. At noon Yi Xian came to a swamp. This was one of the more dangerous places of the ancient Witch clan. The swamp there had existed for a long time. Besides the swamp, it also had poisonous gas. Wu clan members of Time, the clan members of Tian of the clan members were forbidden. Yi Xian frowned as soon as he arrived, because the poisonous gas was so strong that even he was a little surprised. Ordinary cultivators could not withstand this kind of poisonous gas at all. However, to him, the chi of primal chaos had no effect on him at all. Any chi or evil that entered his body would be purified by the chi of primal chaos. Just like now, the chi of primal chaos disappeared without a trace before it could get close to his body. Yi Xian flew toward the depths of the swamp on his sword. In any case, he wouldn't let go of any place in the ancient Wu clan. Soon Yi Xian arrived at the depths of the swamp. In the depths of the swamp he saw some corpses. Most of these corpses belonged to monsters, but some belonged to humans. Obviously someone had been here. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly bent down and looked down. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. Look, there was something swimming in the swamp below him. He ignored it. Just as Yi Xian was about to move forward, the swimming thing below him suddenly dashed out of the swamp. Then a giant bloody mouth bit at him. It was a demonic beast shaped like a crocodile. It was completely pitch black, and its eyes were scarlet red. Yi Xian frowned, and then he waved his hand casually, causing a wave of sword light to slash down. Bang! The demonic beast was directly smashed into the swamp by Yi Xian's sword strike. Yi Xian frowned slightly when he saw this scene. Because his sword strike from before was actually unable to destroy the demonic beast's body. What a formidable defensive ability. Yi Xian was slightly shocked in his heart. Right at this moment, the entire swamp below him suddenly moved. When he looked carefully, Yi Xian noticed that something was swimming in the entire swamp. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched when he saw this scene. What the hell is this? Soon, the heads of the demonic beasts emerged from the surface of the swamp, and all of them were looking at Yi Xian. Seeing the dense group of demonic beasts, Yi Xian's expression changed. He did not expect there to be so many demonic beasts. Yi Xian was about to leave when the voice of the god on the second floor suddenly rang in his mind. "There's an aura." "There's an aura?" Yi Xian was stunned, and then he hurriedly asked, "The aura of Tao Law?" The god on the second floor said, "Go into the swamp." Upon hearing this, Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. "Go into the swamp? Why aren't you going in?" What kind of joke was this? Go into the swamp. Although he was very good at fighting, if this went on he would definitely be finished. At this moment the god on the second floor fell silent. After a while, a shadow suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was the god on the second floor. She glanced at Yi Xian and then looked at the demonic beasts below. The next moment her expression turned ferocious, and she suddenly roared at the bottom. A powerful demonic beast aura swept down, and in an instant the group of demonic beasts below retreated into the swamp. Soon the entire swamp was restored to peace. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. At this moment he remembered that the god on the second floor was also a demonic beast. The god on the second floor looked around and then floated into the distance. Yi Xian hurriedly followed. After a while the god on the second floor stopped. Then she gently slashed her claws at the swamp below, and the swamp below suddenly split open. Then a stone staircase appeared in front of Yi Xian. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was stunned. There was another world under this swamp? At this moment the god on the second floor looked at him. Yi Xian nodded. Understood. Understood. As soon as he finished speaking, he descended and walked down the stone staircase. On the other hand, the god on the second floor had returned to the prison pagoda. Obviously she couldn't come out for too long. Yi Xian walked down the stone staircase. It was pitch black inside. Needless to say, he was a little flustered because every Dao law wasn't simple. The first Dao law had been obtained with the help of the mysterious woman, and he'd obtained it very easily. As for obtaining the spatial Dao law, he'd been completely lucky. As for the second Dao law, he didn't know if he would be so lucky again. No matter what, he had to be careful. Yi Xian continued walking down, and after almost an hour he finally reached the bottom. Not far in front of him was a palace, and in front of the palace was a ground full of corpses. At least 100. The corners of Yi Xian's eyes twitched when he saw this. As expected, things weren't so simple. Yi Xian walked over to the corpses. Based on their appearance, these corpses should have been dead for a very, very long time. Besides that, these corpses, if this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. There were no wounds on their faces, not even a single wound. They died very peacefully as if they'd fallen asleep. How strange. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, Great God on the second floor, this place isn't very safe. The great god on the second floor said indifferently, Are you afraid? Yi Xian smiled. It was not that he was afraid. But at that moment he understood one thing. One couldn't underestimate anything or anyone because that person might give you a pleasant surprise. Yi Xian continued forward. Even though it was dangerous here, he still had to continue forward. After all, he'd promised the great god on the second floor that he would let her out. Yi Xian walked to the entrance of the palace, and he didn't hesitate to directly push it open. The interior of the palace was empty. Yi Xian walked in. The interior of the palace was extremely quiet, and his footsteps seemed especially resounding. Only his footsteps could be heard in the entire palace. At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared not far from Yi Xian. The old man's back was hunched and his body was almost bent. His face was covered with poisonous pus and he looked extremely hideous. At this moment he just stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's expression was calm. Just as he was about to speak, the old man suddenly said, Are you here for that thing? That thing? Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat and he said, Yes. The old man suddenly laughed sinisterly. Yi Xian shook his head. Old man, don't scare me. The old man sneered. Scare you? Young man, do you see those corpses outside? Those are all lessons to be learned from the mistakes of your predecessors. Yi Xian smiled. Do you know who I am? The old man looked at Yi Xian. Who are you? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Low profile. I want to keep a low profile. The old man was expressionless. Low profile? Do you think you can still go out now? Yi Xian frowned. What do you mean? With that he turned and walked out of the hall. When he walked to the door, an invisible barrier blocked in front of him. He couldn't go out. Yi Xian turned to face the old man and the latter said calmly, There's no need to look. The old man has been trapped here for 100 years. 100 years. Trapped for 100 years. Yi Xian said solemnly, Who did it? The old man glanced at Yi Xian. What do you think? Yi Xian was about to speak and at this moment the second floor god suddenly said, It's it. That Dao Law, it's in this hall. Yi Xian quickly said, Should I use the pagoda to subdue it? Hold on. The second floor god said solemnly, It's spying on you, which means that this guy might have regained some consciousness. Yi Xian was stunned and then asked, This Dao Law still has consciousness? The second floor god said coldly, everything in the world has a spirit, let alone this Tao Law? The Great Tao Law and the Space Tao Law are still in a deep sleep. Otherwise, do you think Tao Laws are trash? If they recover just like your Space Tao Law, it can destroy your firmament world with a single thought. Yi Xian was a little embarrassed. Actually, thinking about it, these Tao Laws should not be so simple to be able to suppress these almighties in the prison pagoda. However, if the second Tao Law had recovered, it would be a big problem. As if he knew what Yi Xian was thinking, the second floor god suddenly said, "This pagoda was heavily damaged back then, and all the Tao Laws and the various origins in the pagoda were severely damaged. This second Tao Law can't recover completely. At most, it has recovered a little. Don't worry too much." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "Then what should we do now?" At this moment, the second floor god suddenly said, "Aren't you very good at bluffing? Bluff it into coming in." Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. End of this chapter. Chapter 332. Hoodwink. Yi Xian's first thought was that the second floor alchemist was mocking him. However, the second floor alchemist said, "We can try." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Why not use the pagoda to subdue it directly?" The second floor alchemist said calmly, "If its sentience hasn't awakened, there won't be any problem using the pagoda. However, it has recovered a little. If you force it, you might be the first to die." What? Yi Xian was a little puzzled. "Because you can't beat it?" Yi Xian was speechless. Hoodwink. Yi Xian paced back and forth in the hall. Damn it, how could he hoodwink it? Did he think the other party was Shaolinger that he could just coax? Beside him, the old man looked at Yi Xian. "What are you doing?" Yi Xian shook his head. "My head hurts. I'm taking a walk." The old man was speechless. At that moment, Yi Xian suddenly faced the old man. "Have you come into contact with it?" The old man shook his head. "No, but I can feel that it's in the dark." "In the dark?" Yi Xian frowned. What kind of Tao Law was this second Tao Law? If he wanted to hoodwink it, he had to make the other party show itself first. If he used the prison pagoda, it was very likely that the other party would be on guard. If the other party really attacked him, it would be really troublesome. After a moment of silence, the word, "Earth," quietly condensed between Yi Xian's brows. Great Tao Law. They were both Tao Laws. No matter what, they should know each other, right? At that moment, a mysterious force suddenly blasted toward Yi Xian. Before Yi Xian could react, he was directly smashed into the wall in the distance. Bam! The entire wall shook violently. Before Yi Xian could stand up, he suddenly felt sleepy and was about to fall asleep. At that moment, an angry roar suddenly sounded in his head. "Wake up!" Yi Xian felt as if he was drenched in cold water. He became much more clear-headed. After waking up, cold sweat suddenly appeared on Yi Xian's forehead. Fear. Because in that instant just now, it told him that as long as he fell asleep, he probably wouldn't wake up again. Moreover, in that instant he felt as if something was flowing out of his body. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice, "What kind of power is that?" After a moment of silence, the second floor god said, "You will know in the future." Yi Xian asked again, "Why did it attack me when I used the Grand Tao Law?" The god on the second floor said calmly, "There are a total of 9 Tao Laws in the pagoda. These 9 Tao Laws existed in the pagoda at the beginning. Among them, some got along well while some didn't. Clearly, the Earth Rule doesn't get along well with it." Yi Xian's face was filled with black lines. What nonsense was this? Could there be grudges between these Tao Laws? If the 9 Tao Laws were to gather in the future, wouldn't the entire prison pagoda be turned upside down? Yi Xian retracted his thoughts and asked again, "Then does it have any grudges with this Space Tao Law?" The Almighty on the second floor said calmly, "I don't know. Why don't you try and find out?" Yi Xian's face was filled with black lines. Try. If there was a grudge, wouldn't he be finished? However, he decided to give it a try in the end. Soon, the Space Tao Law appeared between his eyebrows. At this time, there was no movement in the surroundings. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Obviously, the Tao Law on the second floor and the Tao Law on the third floor had no grudges. At this time, a white light suddenly floated in front of Yi Xian. In the white light there was a word, but it was a little blurry so Yi Xian couldn't see it clearly. Tao Law. Seeing this white light, Yi Xian was a little excited. On the other side, the old man's face was filled with astonishment. At this time, the white light circled around Yi Xian's body as if it was sizing something up. Dupe. At this time, the voice of the god on the second floor suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. Hurry up and dupe. This chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. Yi Xian was speechless. At this time, Xiao Linger suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Seeing Xiao Linger, Yi Xian's expression changed and he hurriedly asked, "Why did you come out?" Xiao Linger glanced at the white light and said excitedly, "What is this?" Yi Xian was about to speak, but Xiao Linger hugged the white light. At this time, a powerful aura suddenly erupted from the white light, and this aura directly sent Xiao Linger flying. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly caught Xiao Linger. Xiao Linger was stunned, and in the next moment she flew into a rage. She looked at the white light and said, "You hit me." As she spoke, she flew out. The next moment, under Yi Xian's shocked gaze, she directly turned into a white gas and blasted the white light. Boom! The white light flew out in an instant and directly crashed into the wall in the distance, collapsing it. However, in the next moment, the white light rushed toward Xiao Linger again. Xiao Linger's small hand suddenly clapped, and in the next moment, a powerful force suddenly gathered in the center of her palm. In an instant, she shouted softly and then pressed the seal forward. "Go to hell." Boom! The white light was blasted away again, and this time, it directly crashed into the entire hall and collapsed. Inside the hall, Yi Xian and the old man were dumbfounded. Yi Xian was completely stunned. In the distance, the two little fellows were still fighting, but Xiao Linger had completely crushed the Dao Law, and at this moment, the Dao Law was being chased everywhere by Xiao Linger. Yi Xian's throat rolled and then he said, "Second floor guru, so this Xiao Linger is actually so good at fighting." "That's normal." The second floor guru said indifferently, "How can a world source be weak? Also, don't tell her that she's very good at fighting, or you'll be finished in the future." I wouldn't dare." Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. How could he dare to tell Xiao Linger that she was very good at fighting? Because the current Xiao Linger obviously had no concept of her own strength. Simply put, she didn't even know that she was very good at fighting. Once she knew that she was very good at fighting, this little fellow would definitely flip the heavens. At this moment, Xiao Linger suddenly carried the white light to Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian and grinned. "Give this to me." Yi Xian nodded. "Alright, bring it into play." Little Ling blinked her eyes and was very happy. "Then I'll bring him along." Yi Xian nodded and said seriously, "Alright." Just like that, Xiao Linger carried the Dao Law back into the prison pagoda. Outside, Yi Xian was very puzzled. Why can't the second Dao Law defeat her? The second floor guru said, "The second Dao Law's ability is special. It's an invincible existence to some people, but it can't do anything to others. Xiao Linger is the source of heaven and earth. To be precise, she's a spirit, and the second floor's special ability is completely useless against her. Understand?" Upon hearing this, Yi Xian instantly understood. To put it bluntly, Xiao Linger could defeat the second floor's Dao Law, but she might not necessarily be able to defeat the major Dao Law and the spatial Dao Law. No matter what, the second Dao Law was finally in his hands. Yi Xian turned to leave. At this moment, the nearby old man suddenly said, "You've obtained it?" Yi Xian turned to face the old man and smiled. "I'm just returning it to its rightful owner." With that, he turned to leave. The old man said again, "Young friend, wait." Yi Xian stopped. "Is something the matter?" The old man hesitated for a moment and said, "The old man sacrificed too much to obtain it." At this point, his expression was slightly complicated. "May I ask exactly what it is?" Yi Xian smiled. "It's a divine object. To be honest, I'm not very sure what it is." The old man nodded slightly. "I understand." Yi Xian said with a smile, "Goodbye." With that, he was about to leave. Meanwhile, the old man said, "This is the forbidden area of Chanyu. Behind this is where the Qinyu sect used to be. However, the Qinyu sect has already been destroyed. Please continue to the next page. Although it has been destroyed, the grand protective formation of the Qinyu sect is still operating automatically. If you're able to destroy it, then the wealth of the Qinyu sect will be yours." "The Qinyu sect?" Yi Xian frowned slightly. "I've never heard of it." The old man smiled. "There are many young sects." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "How strong is the Qinyu sect?" To be honest, with his current wealth, he didn't care about ordinary powers at all. If it was just a small sect, he wouldn't be willing to waste his time. The old man smiled. The Qinyu sect was a power from a very long time ago. In those days, it was only inferior to the Realm Defense Alliance, Pale Sword Sect, and Profound Gate. At its peak, it was comparable to these powers. Yi Xian was instantly tempted. He didn't know how rich the Realm Defense Alliance was, but he knew how rich the Pale Sword Sect was. Just the swords in the Sword Tomb were already very terrifying. Since the Qinyu sect was able to compare itself to the Realm Defense Alliance, Then it was definitely not simple. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, please take me to have a look. The old man glanced at Yi Xian, and then he led Yi Xian out of the hall. Outside the hall, the old man glanced at the corpses, shook his head and sighed. He didn't say anything and just led Yi Xian towards the back. After walking for a while, a giant mountain gate appeared in front of Yi Xian. This entrance was even larger than the Pale Sword Sect's entrance. Behind the mountain gate were many large halls. How imposing. That was Yi Xian's first thought. At this moment he believed the old man. The Qinyu sect really isn't simple. Yi Xian was just about to go over when the old man suddenly shook his head. There's a grand formation. With that, he lightly stomped his right foot, and a stone flew over, but it disappeared without a trace before it could even get close to the entrance. Seeing this, Yi Xian's expression became somewhat solemn. The old man didn't speak but looked at Yi Xian. Obviously, if Yi Xian couldn't find a way, then there really wasn't any other way. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian walked up to the mountain gate. He was just about to draw his sword when the old man beside him hurriedly said, "Don't use force. If you do, the formation will be activated immediately. At that time we'll all die here." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "If I don't force it, then there's no other way." Stupid. At this time, the voice of the second-floor god suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. Space Dao Law, use the Space Dao Law to sneak in. Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he said, "Can I?" With that, he didn't wait for the second-floor god's reply and directly activated the Space Dao Law. In an instant he disappeared into thin air. The old man was stunned. When Yi Xian reappeared, he was already inside the entrance. The old man was speechless. At this moment Yi Xian was overjoyed. So it really worked. As if he thought of something, he turned to the nearby old man. "Sorry, I can enter because of my special movement technique. Don't worry, after I enter, I will find a way to break the formation. Then you can come in." If he gave the Space Dao Law to the old man would be able to enter. However, he wouldn't give it to an outsider. The old man nodded slightly. "Understood, young friend. Please be careful." Yi Xian nodded, turned around and walked in. Before long, Yi Xian's expression gradually became solemn because he saw some corpses along the way. These corpses didn't have any injuries and were very peaceful as if they were asleep. Yi Xian stopped and asked in a low voice, "Senior, what special ability does the second Dao Law have?" The second-floor god was silent for a while before he said, "Dream power, it can enter one's dream and kill them silently." Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said subconsciously, "If I condense it into a sword, won't it become a sword in a dream? P.S. I haven't updated much recently, so I don't dare to be naughty. Wait until I explode one day, then I'll be naughty again." End of this chapter. Chapter 333. Sword in Dreams. At the thought of this, Yi Xian's blood boiled instantly. If there was a sword technique that could kill someone in their sleep, that would be too terrifying. The Almighty on the second floor fell silent. Obviously, although the idea that Yi Xian had proposed was a little absurd, it was not impossible. This was the special ability of the second Dao Law. If Yi Xian condensed it into a sword, it might really be the sword in dreams that Yi Xian had mentioned. After a while, Yi Xian calmed down a little. He felt that it was not impossible, but there was definitely a certain level of difficulty. His intuition told him that it was not that simple. However, he would definitely give it a try when the time came. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and continued forward. Along the way he saw too many corpses and they had all died in the same way. Among them he even saw the corpses of true defensive Dharma realm powerhouses. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Almighty on the second floor, were these Dao laws that powerful in the past?" The Almighty on the second floor said calmly, "Do you think I'm powerful?" Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Powerful, definitely powerful." The second floor said coldly, "But I couldn't beat it in the past either." Upon hearing that, Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat. In that case, the power of these Dao laws was much more terrifying than he had imagined. Yi Xian asked again, "Then the question is, why did they, after following me?" At this point, his expression became a little strange. This was because these Dao laws did not seem to be that powerful after they had followed him. The second floor sneered. "Ignorant. They are like Shaolinger now. They don't know their own strength at all. Moreover, since their spiritual intelligence is in a deep sleep, their power can't be released at all. Do you understand?" "Oh yes, the second Dao law is not completely in a deep sleep. You can compete with it." Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. He would not compete with it. He had already seen how terrifying the second Dao law was. Even he was afraid of its ability. Yi Xian didn't ask any more questions and continued forward. Soon Yi Xian discovered that the entire Qinyu sect had been wiped out. The main culprit was probably the second Dao Law. Thinking of this, Yi Xian thought of the World Prison Pagoda. He wondered what kind of treasure this pagoda was. Not only was it able to imprison so many experts, but it also had such a heaven-defying treasure inside. Moreover, there were still 5 levels above them. In other words, there were still 5 types of Dao laws. What were these 5 types of Dao laws? Yi Xian was a little curious. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. He had arrived in front of a palace and he walked in. There were some people inside the palace, but they were all dead. Yi Xian raised his head and looked in front of him. Not far away from him stood a statue of a middle-aged man. He held a long sword in his right hand and a black ruler in his left. Obviously, this should be the ancestral master of the Qinyu sect. Yi Xian shook his head slightly. He hesitated for a moment before he walked up to the statue and bowed slightly. He thought to himself, I have no enmity with the Qinyu sect. I, Yi Xian, have taken advantage of you by coming here today. Thank you very much. With that, he turned around and left. At this moment, the statue suddenly cracked open, and a wisp of white light floated out. The white light gradually condensed into a figure that looked exactly like the statue. Upon seeing this, Yi Xian's heart trembled, and he secretly put his guard up. The middle-aged man glanced at Yi Xian and asked, Why are you bowing to me? Yi Xian was stunned for a moment before he said seriously, It's a form of respect. The middle-aged man nodded slightly and sized up Yi Xian. Soon there was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Half-step sword, immortal, true defensive realm. Less than 20 years old. As he spoke, excitement appeared in his eyes. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he asked softly, Senior? The middle-aged man smiled. Are you willing to join my Qinyu sect? Yi Xian was stunned for a moment before he hurriedly shook his head. No, to tell you the truth, this junior is already a disciple of the Pale Sword sect. The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment before he smiled. It's fine. There's no rule that one person can't join 2 sects? This. Yi Xian was a little confused. Could he join 2 sects? The middle-aged man continued, To tell you the truth, my Qinyu sect suddenly experienced a great change and was completely destroyed. Now, our lineage has been broken for a long time. Since you came here today, it's obvious that you are fated to join my Qinyu sect. I won't force you to do anything. As long as you receive my Qinyu sect's heritage and don't let my orthodoxy go extinct in this world, that's all. At this point he smiled. Of course there are benefits too. If you agree, this Qinyu sect's 1,000 years of accumulation will be yours. In addition, I will also give you a treasure. What do you think? Treasure. 1,000 years of accumulation. Yi Xian felt his heart beat faster. But his expression was extremely calm. Senior, how could I possibly deserve this? The middle-aged man smiled. Your talent is rare in this world. Naturally, you can become my Qinyu sect's disciple. Yi Xian sighed in his heart. Too outstanding. What can I do about it? What do you think? The middle-aged man asked. Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, I agree, senior. Hearing this, the middle-aged man smiled. That's good. As he said this, he flicked his finger. A black ring fell in front of him. The middle-aged man said, This is the ethereal execution ring. It's the symbol of my Qinyu sect's sect leader. In addition, it has a special ability. It can devour a person's energy and cultivation for its own use. However, this is really harmful to the heavens. Don't use it recklessly. Devour a person's energy and cultivation. Hearing this, Yi Xian's eyelid twitched. He quickly asked, Senior, can this ring devour a true defense law realm cultivator? The middle-aged man shook his head. Yi Xian's expression instantly dimmed. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man said, Not to mention a true defense law realm cultivator, even a cultivator above that realm can be devoured. This ring doesn't belong to the firmament world. I obtained it in the outer realm. When he heard this, Yi Xian was stunned and then he was overjoyed. Treasure. This is a great treasure. The middle-aged man continued, Besides that, this world also contains the inheritance of my Qinyu sect, including the best cultivation techniques, martial techniques, and divine abilities. As for Qinyu sect's 1,000 years of accumulation, they're all in the halls behind. You can go and take them yourself. Hearing this, Yi Xian felt slightly embarrassed. This advantage was simply too great. At this moment, the middle-aged man added, However, I have a condition. Yi Xian smiled, Senior, please speak. The middle-aged man glanced at Yi Xian. In the future, if you want to leave this world, I hope you can help me find a successor. If possible, you can let Qinyu sect reappear in this world. Yi Xian thought about it, then nodded, I'll try my best. The middle-aged man smiled, that will be enough. Saying so, his body gradually became illusory. Yi Xian knew that the other party was going to disappear completely. He hesitated, then bowed slightly to the middle-aged man again. No matter what, he really took advantage of the other party this time. At this time, the middle-aged man said, From now on, you will be the only survivor of Qinyu sect. Yi Xian was stunned, then hurriedly said, Senior Yu? The middle-aged man smiled. Under normal circumstances, there are only two ways for us cultivators to die. One is to be killed, the other is to die of exhaustion. My luck is good, it's the second. In fact, the result is already very good. But in the end, I'm still a little unwilling. Cultivating for thousands of years, but in the end, I still have to turn to dust. With that, he completely disappeared from the scene. In Yi Xian's hand, the ethereal execution ring lightly trembled. Lifespan. Yi Xian was silent where he stood. He remembered that the mysterious woman said that after many cultivators become strong, they only have eyes for the Tao and longevity. In his opinion, the longer they live, the more they want to live. Or in other words, the longer they live, the more they fear death. After a while, Yi Xian shook his head, turned around and left. In Qingqing, his goal was very simple, to let his sister live a happy life. But now, he found that the greater one's ability, the greater one's ambition. For example, at this moment he also wanted to see the outside world, and he also wanted to have the kind of powerful ability that could destroy heaven and earth. Was this wrong? No, in his opinion it was not wrong. If one did not have the heart to fight, they would only become more and more ordinary. After leaving the main hall, Yi Xian went to Qinyu sect's martial skill pavilion. Inside he saw countless martial skills, among which there were more than 20 heaven-ranked martial skills. In addition, there were more than 100 earth-ranked martial skills. Terrifying. Yi Xian took a deep breath and put them all away. Then he went to Qinyu sect's arcane weapon pavilion. This arcane weapon pavilion had a total of 4 floors. He went straight to the top floor, where he saw more than 20 heaven-ranked treasures. Among them, there was even a heaven-ranked high-grade fan. When the fan was opened, it flashed with lightning. Thundering flash. Heaven-ranked high-grade. But there was only one. And among the other 20 heaven-ranked spiritual weapons, 3 were swords. I struck it rich. Yi Xian took a deep breath. This time it wasn't a sudden riches but a sudden riches. After putting away everything, Yi Xian went to Qinyu sect's treasure pavilion. Inside he found a total of 200,000 purple source crystals. In addition, there were more than 30 billion top-grade spiritual stones. Seeing this, Yi Xian was petrified on the spot. At this moment he felt like he was dreaming. This was too unreal. After a while, Yi Xian put everything away. His current wealth was not something an ordinary faction could compare to. Just like that, Yi Xian began to search like crazy. This time he searched for more than 4 hours. It could be said that he had collected all the valuable items in Qinyu sect. In front of Qinyu sect's main entrance, Yi Xian bowed slightly to the people of Qinyu sect. Ancestors of Qinyu sect, I Yi Xian, swear to the heavens that one day Qinyu sect will return to the firmament world. If I break this oath, may the heavens and earth destroy me. With that he turned around and left. Not long after Yi Xian left, a shadow suddenly appeared where he was standing. It was the middle-aged man in the main hall. The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian's back in the distance. Gradually his cold eyes softened. Soon, the middle-aged man completely disappeared from the scene. In the distance inside Yi Xian's body, a low sigh was heard. Dodged another disaster and still got so many treasures. Is there still justice in this world? Chapter 334. When Yi Xian arrived outside the mountain gate, he discovered that the old man was no longer there. Had he left? Yi Xian frowned. After thinking for a moment, he shook his head slightly and left the underground mystic realm. Ancient Wu clan. In the treehouse, Yi Xian was sitting cross-legged on the ground. He was extremely excited. His current wealth was too terrifying. The wealth left behind by the Qinyu sect would be enough for him to use for a very long time. Of course, no one would spend this wealth if they were not powerful enough. The crisis was not over yet. Cultivate. Yi Xian immediately returned to the Pale Sword sect after bidding farewell to Wei Yang Tian. At the moment, the Pale Sword sect was on high alert and everyone was on standby. Everyone knew very well that the Realm Defense Alliance would definitely make a comeback. Inside the prison pagoda, ever since the second Dao Law had returned to the prison pagoda, it had been brought to the second floor by the Almighty on the second floor. Of course Xiao Linger had also been brought in. However, not long after, Xiao Linger had run out dejectedly, and the Almighty on the second floor had not made a move. Yi Xian had been unable to contact him several times, and he had not been able to enter the second floor. Although he could have entered by force, he had not done so. Therefore Yi Xian had gone to ask Xiao Linger. The little girl had looked aggrieved and said that the Almighty on the second floor had taken her treasure away. Obviously it was the second Tao law. Yi Xian knew that the Almighty on the second floor would probably come out soon. After comforting Xiao Linger, Yi Xian began to cultivate. But this time his cultivation was purely about comprehension. Now, his sword technique and realm could no longer be improved. Especially his realm. Advancing too quickly was not a good thing either. The only thing that could be improved was his sword Tao realm. Sword Immortal. If he could become a sword immortal, he would even be able to fight a powerhouse like Supremacy Lu. Enlightenment. At the back of the cloud's word peak, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the peak, like an old monk in meditation. He sat there for more than 10 days. During this period, Yu Qi and Gu Shaoxian would come here every day. Every time they came, the two women would stand there for 2 to 4 hours before quietly leaving. In addition to the two women, Qin Beihan, the sect leader, had also come. He did not disturb Yi Xian, and even Jian Xian had come once. Jian Xian stayed for quite a long time. He stayed for more than half a day. In the beginning, there was a trace of worry in his eyes. However, when he left, the worry in his eyes turned into gratification. Lin Songyun also glanced at Yi Xian, but his eyes were filled with worry. This time, if the reinforcements from the Spirit Void Star Palace did not arrive first, things would be troublesome. A moment later, Lin Songyun shook his head, sighed and left. Realm Protection Alliance. After the battle with Pale Sword Sect, there had been no movement from the Realm Protection Alliance. Now Realm Protection Mountain was very peaceful. Inside the palace, Supremacy Lu sat cross-legged on a chair. His eyes were closed and his hands were placed on his knees. An air current slowly drifted around him. Just at this moment, Supremacy Lu suddenly opened his eyes. Below, everyone looked at him. After a moment of silence, Supremacy Lu said softly, 5 days. My lord will personally come to this world in 5 days. 5 days. Hearing this, everyone's faces lit up with joy. 5 days from now, it would be the end of Pale Sword Sect. In a vast expanse of space, a nebula warship sped through the air. This warship's speed had already reached its limit. Finally, after an unknown period of time, the nebula warship stopped in front of a starry palace. An old man flew out of the warship. This person was Qin Zhen, who had rushed back from the Azure Firmament world. After disembarking from the warship, Qin Zhen headed straight for the Spirit Void Star Palace. Just as he arrived at the entrance, an old man appeared before him. This person was Palace Master Lin Su of the Spirit Void Star Palace. Qin Zhen bowed deeply. Palace Master, I found him. Lin Su was stunned and then he said, Where? Wait, why didn't you bring him back? Qin Zhen laughed bitterly. I couldn't. There's a power in that stellar region that's bent on killing him. He's in great danger now. Lin Su's expression instantly changed. What power is it? Qin Zhen shook his head. A third-rate power. However, the leader of that power is rather formidable. Song Yun and I aren't a match for him. Lin Su spoke in a low voice. Did you report it to my Spirit Void Star Palace? Qin Zhen laughed bitterly. I did. They've never heard of me. My stellar region is too remote. Lin Su fell silent for a moment. He was about to speak when he suddenly turned around. There was a woman standing not too far away from him. It was the woman in a plain dress. Her expression was icy cold, and she emanated an extremely oppressive aura. Lin Su hurriedly bowed. Senior. The woman looked at Qin Zhen. Where is he? Qin Zhen hurriedly said, at the edge of the never-ending stellar region. It's a month and a half from here. A month and a half. The woman in the plain dress frowned. In the next moment, she vanished on the spot. Lin Su heaved a huge sigh of relief when he saw this. Gone. Finally gone. During this period of time, everyone in Spirit Void Star Palace had been trembling in fear because this great god was too terrifying. Everyone was afraid that if something happened to the person she was looking for, she would destroy Spirit Void Star Palace with a single strike. Beside Lin Su, Qin Zhen said in a low voice, Palace Master, do you know who this person is? Lin Su shook his head. I don't know. After an unknown period of time, An old man appeared by Enlanchio's side, and the old man bowed slightly. "Young Mississippi," Enlanchio spoke in a light voice. "Speak." The old man hesitated for a moment before he said, "In a few days at most, the Lord of the Realm Defense Alliance will personally descend upon the firmament world. At that time, the Firmament Sword sect will definitely be annihilated unless the Sword Master of the firmament world reappears." Enlanchio fell silent for a moment and then she nodded. "I understand." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. Meanwhile, the old man suddenly obstructed Enlanchio's path and laughed bitterly. "Young Miss, the Patriarch has given strict orders that young Miss isn't allowed to head to the Firmament Sword sect." Enlanchio shook her head. "He's in a very dangerous situation this time." The old man's smile grew even more bitter. "Young Miss, if the Lord of the Realm Defense Alliance personally descends upon the firmament world, then it would be useless even if you head there." Enlanchio spoke indifferently. "Then there is even more reason for me to go." As soon as she finished speaking, she intended to leave the mountain. Meanwhile, the old man hesitated for a moment before he said, "Young Miss, the Patriarch has given orders. If young Miss insists on going, then I can only offend you." Enlanchio's sudden disappearance caused the old man's expression to change drastically, and he slapped his right palm forward. Bang! With a loud explosion, the old man was sent flying hundreds of feet away. The old man looked at Enlanchio with astonishment. "Young Miss, you," Enlanchio shook her head. "No one in my clan can stop me. Understand?" As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and descended the mountain. On the mountain, the old man slapped his thigh and was extremely excited. "What a great young Miss. Even if the Firmament World Sword Master is reincarnated, he can't compare to her. This won't do. Nothing can happen to her. I must notify the Patriarch as soon as possible." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and vanished into the horizon. Firmament World. Firmament Sword Sect. Yi Xian was still meditating by the river. During this period of time, he'd been constantly comprehending. Sword Immortal. Once one calmed down and pondered properly, one would notice many problems that one hadn't thought of in the past, and one would also notice some new things. Sword Dao. This path was like rowing a boat against the current. If one didn't work hard every single day and didn't move forward, then one would definitely move backward. On the other hand, he'd been meditating by the river for almost half a month. During this half a month, he'd been questioning himself from the depths of his heart. He didn't avoid his heart, but he knew his heart. Knew himself. This understanding was to know his strong points, but he also had to know his weak points. He had to know his good side, but he had to know the evil and dirty side of his heart. At dawn, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes, and sword light flickered within them. Yi Xian stood up slowly and remained silent. This silence lasted for an entire morning. P.S. Does anyone want to hit me? Chapter 335. At noon, Yi Xian suddenly smiled. He smiled very happily. As Yi Xian's smile appeared, a gust of sword intent suddenly floated out of his body and then drifted into the sky. Soon the sword intent disappeared from the world. At this time, a sword suddenly flew out of Yi Xian's body and was about to fly up into the sky. However, Yi Xian's right hand gently pressed down and the sword immediately landed in front of him. Enlightened Sword Heart. At this moment he truly understood what Enlightened Sword Heart meant. To put it bluntly, it was to clearly understand oneself. A person has his or her strengths and weaknesses. There is a good side and an evil side. There is a pure side and an evil side. And a person will often escape from their inner heart, which is to escape from their evil side. No matter which side it is him, Yi Xian. This is Enlightened Sword Heart. Sword Immortal. At this moment he was no longer a half-step Sword Immortal, but a true Sword Immortal. However, Yi Xian had a feeling that his Sword Dao had just begun. After a while, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He turned around and was about to leave. Not far away, two women slowly walked over. It was Yu Qi and Gu Shaoxian. Yi Xian bowed slightly to the two. Yu Qi sized him up and asked, "Is it done?" Yi Xian smiled and nodded. Seeing this, the corner of Yu Qi's mouth curled up. Good. Good. Gu Shaoxian also nodded. Excellent. Saying this, she glanced at Yu Qi and said softly, "He should be the youngest Sword Immortal in our firmament world, right?" Yu Qi shook his head. "He is the youngest Sword Immortal in the history of our firmament world besides the Ancestral Master. No, when the Ancestral Master became a Sword Immortal, he was around his age." Saying this, the smile on her face gradually widened. Gu Shaoxian said softly, Little junior sister has not been so happy in a long time. Yuqi looked at Yi Xian, his smile gradually vanishing. Azure Sword Sect finally has a successor. We should be happy. At this point she seemed to have thought of something and said, keep this matter to yourself for now and don't spread it. Otherwise the Realm Defense Alliance will kill you at all costs. Gu Shaoxian nodded. Indeed. If the Realm Defense Alliance knew that Yi Xian had become a sword immortal, then the Realm Defense Alliance would definitely go crazy and kill Yi Xian. Because they absolutely did not dare to allow Yi Xian to continue growing. Most of the time there was no right or wrong. It was like a country. It was the most powerful country in the world and another country wanted to rise. Thus they were naturally in opposition. Moreover, Yi Xian was a disciple of the Blue Sword Sect. One had to know that the Blue Sword Sect and the Realm Protecting Alliance had a long history of enmity. Yi Xian personally prepared a meal. After the three of them were full, Yi Xian tidied up and went to find Lin Songyun in the room. Lin Songyun sized up Yi Xian. Moments later he suddenly frowned. Have you broken through? Yi Xian didn't hide it and directly released his aura. Sword immortal. Lin Songyun was stunned at this scene, and then he shook his head and smiled. Young friend, you really are a genius. To be able to become a sword immortal at such a young age is extremely rare, even in the galaxy I come from. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, I came here today because I have something to ask. Lin Songyun smiled. Speak. Yi Xian said in a low voice, the woman in the plain dress. Is she her main body or a clone? Lin Songyun was stunned when he heard this. Main body? Clone? As if remembering something he suddenly stood up. What do you mean? Yi Xian was taken aback by Lin Songyun's question. The reason he asked this was because the woman in the plain dress had said that she had a total of 3 clones. The previous one had already disappeared. In other words, there were 2 more clones in her main body. He and the woman in the plain dress had a promise, and that was that they would meet again in the clouds. This meeting was not referring to the clone, but the main body. That was why he asked this question. Lin Songyun stared deadly at Yi Xian. You are saying that the person who appeared in my spiritual Void Star Palace could be just a clone? Yi Xian nodded. Seeing this, Lin Songyun immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. He sat down, his whole body a little weak. Clone. At this moment, his heart was in extreme shock. Because all this time, they had never thought about whether the woman in the plain dress was a clone or her main body. Who would have thought about this? But if the woman in the plain dress was just a clone, then there was a problem. Just how powerful was her main body? How powerful? Lin Songyun laughed bitterly. He couldn't imagine it. Yi Xian was about to continue asking when Lin Songyun shook his head. My friend, I don't know if she's a clone or her main body. May I ask what's your relationship with her? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, we can be considered master and disciple. Master and disciple. Lin Songyun took a deep look at Yi Xian and then he sighed. No wonder you're so outstanding. With such a good teacher, even if you're a pig. When he spoke up to hear, he seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly stopped. After that, he smiled apologetically at Yi Xian. Yi Xian was slightly speechless. How could you speak like that? Lin Songyun continued. My friend, you're already a sword immortal now. With your current strength, you can actually leave this place and head to a better place to develop. If you leave with me now, you'll... Yi Xian suddenly laughed. Senior, there are some things that are more important than your life. Lin Songyun looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian grinned. Pale Sword Sect has treated me well. How can I leave now? If I leave, how can I have a clear conscience? Moreover, there are many people that I care about in this world. Perhaps one day I'll leave this world and see the outside world. But not now. Lin Songyun fell silent for a moment and then he said softly, my friend is so loyal. I'm afraid you'll be burdened by your emotions in the future. Yi Xian smiled and said, Senior, if the experts of Spirit Void Star Palace come to reinforce us, how long will it take for them to arrive? Lin Songyun said solemnly, it's not a problem how long it takes. The problem is that they must arrive before the Realm Protector Alliance leader. Otherwise, Yi Xian thought for a moment and then he said, there's one more thing I'd like to ask Senior. I'm currently at the True Imperial Law Realm, but what realm is above the Formation Law Realm? Lin Songyun opened his right hand and then he spun it lightly. In an instant, the space around his palm cracked open, and then a wave of energy seeped into his hand from the crack in space. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. What's this? Lin Songyun said softly, above the True Imperial Law Realm is the Void-Piercing Realm. The Void-Piercing Realm means to break open space and obtain the energy of dark matter from within space to continuously strengthen oneself. It's extremely difficult to accomplish this because the firmness of space far surpasses what ordinary people can imagine. The void-piercing realm. Yi Xian said solemnly, I heard Master say that if space cracks open, there will be spatial turbulence. If one is swept into it, they will definitely die a horrible death. Lin Songyun smiled. She's right. Thus, in order to reach the void-piercing realm, one's attainments in space must reach a certain level. If one uses brute force to break through space, it will only harm oneself. Many wandering cultivators, because they don't have anyone to guide them, play themselves to death when trying to break through to this realm. At this point he looked at Yi Xian. Young friend, if you want to break through to this realm, you must be extremely careful. Moreover, you must have someone by your side to protect you. Otherwise, if anything goes wrong, not to mention young friend, even we will not be able to survive if we are swept into it. Yi Xian nodded slightly. Since senior says so, I understand. Void-piercing realm. Yi Xian deeply remembered this. Qin Beihan, Supreme Lord Lu should be void-piercing realm cultivators. At this point, Yi Xian asked again, can a true imperial law realm cultivator fight against a void-piercing realm cultivator? Of course. Lin Songyun said. To measure a person's strength, it's not just by their realm. It also depends on other aspects such as battle awareness, battle skills, techniques, cultivation methods, physique, and even bloodline. In short, there are people who can challenge those of a higher realm. It's just that it's more difficult. Yi Xian nodded. Actually, the current him wanted to fight against a void-piercing realm cultivator, because the true imperial law realm was no longer attractive to him. A moment later Yi Xian got up and left. Inside the room Lin Songyun's eyes were filled with worry. Even now, he was still worried that the cultivators of the Spirit Void Star Palace would not be able to arrive as soon as possible. Realm Defense Alliance. On this day, Supreme Lord Lu, who was sitting cross-legged in the main hall, suddenly opened his eyes. In the next moment he got up and walked out of the hall. At the same time, a voice suddenly rang out from within the hall. Pass down my orders. All true Imperial Law Realm cultivators of the Realm Defense Alliance are to head to Pale Sword Sect. In addition, inform all the forces in Azure Firmament World that if they do not come with us to fight against Pale Sword Sect today, they will be the enemy of our Realm Defense Alliance. At the door of the hall, the Left Protector said solemnly, this action may anger some people. Supreme Lord Lu said indifferently, they want to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, but our Realm Defense Alliance will not. If they do not come, we will take care of them all at once. The Left Protector was stunned, then hurriedly said, but the Lord is coming. Supreme Lord Lu nodded slightly. He will be here soon. This time, we must take advantage of the Lord's arrival to eliminate some of the forces with ulterior motives. We can also take advantage of the origin heart of the divine central continent. The Left Protector nodded, that's true. After so many years, many forces in the Azure Firmament world have gradually expanded. They think that they can compete with our Realm Defense Alliance. This time we must let them understand that in the eyes of our Realm Defense Alliance, they are still ants. At the door, Supreme Lord Lu slowly closed his eyes. Yi Xian, this time I want to see if that woman behind you can still protect you. With that he disappeared from the hall. At the same time, all the experts of the Realm Defense Alliance moved out. Very quickly, the Realm Defense Alliance's edict spread throughout the entire divine central continent. For a time, the entire Azure Firmament world was in an uproar. The Realm Defense Alliance was forcing everyone to take a stand. If they did not help the Realm Defense Alliance, they would be the enemy. Domineering. Incomparably domineering. At first, no forces moved, but at noon, some of the forces experts began to head to Pale Sword Sect. Chapter 336. Outside Pale Sword Sect, more and more forces were gathering. Among them, the famous ones were Frosty North Sect, Thousand Beast Mountain Range, Sky Cloud City, and even one of the top 4 clans, Sima family. Other than that, there were countless other smaller forces. Of course, those who came were all true Imperial Realm experts. This time, Pale Sword Sect was being targeted by the entire Azure world. Everyone knew that the Realm Protector Alliance leader was coming to the Azure Firmament world personally. How terrifying would an expert of this level be? And at this time, the Realm Protecting Alliance wanted everyone to express their stance. Those who didn't would definitely be dealt with after Pale Sword Sect was dealt with. If the Blue Sword Sect's ancestor, the Sword Master, was still here, perhaps everyone would hesitate. But now that the Sword Master was gone, what could the Blue Sword Sect use to fight against the Realm Protection Alliance? More and more experts rushed to Pale Sword Sect and expressed their willingness to form an alliance with the Realm Protecting Alliance to deal with Pale Sword Sect. Outside Pale Sword Sect, it was surrounded by countless experts. Somewhere above the clouds, Supreme Lu placed his hands behind his back, expressionless. Behind Supreme Lu, the left protector said, Upper Realm and Family, Li Family and Celestial Gate are not making any moves. Celestial Gate. Supreme Lu went silent for a moment and said softly, Ignore them as long as they don't help Pale Sword Sect. The left protector nodded slightly. These few families in Celestial Gate were not simple. Even the Realm Protecting Alliance was afraid of them. Moreover, once these few clans joined hands, the trouble would not be small. At this moment, the left protector suddenly said, Should we act now? Supreme Lu shook his head, Wait for the Lord. The left protector spoke in a low voice, We now have 13 void-piercing realms and 59 true imperial magic realms. Moreover, there are even more true imperial magic realm powerhouses rushing over. With such a lineup, it is enough to destroy Blue Sword Sect. Supreme Lu said softly, Wait for the Lord. Only when the Lord is here can we be foolproof. The left protector looked at Supreme Lu, Are you still afraid of the person behind Yi Xian? Supreme Lu nodded, That person is very powerful, not someone we can fight against. Only his lordship could deal with her. All in all, we are not in a rush. Moreover, many factions in the Azure Firmament world have yet to express their stance. The left protector pondered, What is the background of the person behind Yi Xian? Lord Lu shook his head. I don't know, but my instinct tells me that she will appear. If this person doesn't die, my heart won't be at ease. The left protector nodded. Then let's wait for now. Below, within the Blue Sword Sect. In a great hall, the experts of the Azure Sword Sect gathered. Yi Xian was also present. Qin Beihan glanced at the crowd and softly said, Everyone, the Realm Protection Alliance is determined to destroy my Pale Sword Sect this time. Jin Xian said indifferently, So be it. Everyone in the hall nodded. Right now they had no choice but to fight. Qin Beihan nodded, then looked at Yi Xian and Shang Yu below. Later, the two of you will leave, understand? The two of them were about to speak when Qin Beihan said seriously, Although the two of you are not weak, it is useless in this battle. At this time Yi Xian suddenly said, Sect leader, if the two of us leave, what about the other disciples of the Pale Sword Sect? Qin Beihan went silent. Yi Xian smiled, Sect leader, it is really unfair to treat the other disciples like this. I feel that we are all disciples of the Pale Sword Sect, we should walk together, fight together, and die together. Beside Yi Xian, Shang Yu nodded, I have the same thought. Looking at Yi Xian, Qin Beihan had a complicated look in his eyes. If you don't leave, the Pale Sword Sect might completely disappear from the Azure Firmament world. Yi Xian smiled, So what? Saying so, he shook his head, If the sect is in trouble, we will naturally stay behind. If we leave now, Yi Xian can't do it. At this time Yu Qi, who was not far from Yi Xian, looked at him, Sometimes it is more important to live, do you understand? Yi Xian shook his head, Anyway, I will not leave now. Moreover, I feel that our Pale Sword Sect might have the strength to fight. If we work together, why would we fear the Realm Defense Alliance? Even if our Pale Sword Sect loses, so what? At least we won't die a useless death. Not far away, Jin Xian nodded, Well said. What is there to fear about death? Useless people who are afraid of death. Qin Beihan looked at the two of them and shook his head with a smile. A moment later Yi Xian and Shang Yu left the hall, leaving only Qin Beihan and Jian Xian. Qin Beihan said softly, If they don't leave our Pale Sword Sect. Jian Xian looked at Qin Beihan, Do you know why it is so hard to improve your sword Dao? Because you think too much. Finished speaking, Jian Xian turned and left. Inside the hall, Qin Beihan was silent for a long time. Finally, he shook his head and smiled bitterly. As the leader of a sect, he naturally had to think a little more and consider a little more. One had to know that every decision he made was related to the life and death of countless disciples in Pale Sword Sect. The position of sect master was a kind of power, but also a kind of restriction. Outside Pale Sword Sect, more and more experts rushed over. At this moment, countless forces in Azure Firmament world had already expressed their stance. Even Blue Waves Academy had expressed its stance on Realm Defense Alliance. Moreover, Blue Waves Academy's Dean Qiu Yuan had personally rushed over. What was worth mentioning was that Shen Gate, and Clan and Li Clan in Upper World had not made any move. Outside Pale Sword Sect, somewhere in the clouds, an old man suddenly appeared behind Lu Xun. Xun, not good. Lu Xun opened his eyes. What's wrong? The old man said solemnly, 4 of us were assassinated. Assassinated? Lu Xun narrowed his eyes. Let's go take a look. Soon the 2 of them arrived on the ground. In front of Lu Xun and the old man there were 4 corpses. Every one of the corpses had their throats slit by a sword. Lu Xun clenched his right hand. It's swordsman. Behind Lu Xun the old man nodded. It should be swordsman. He is probably an expert in pale sword sect. Lu Xun asked solemnly, did you find anything? The old man shook his head. When we found them they were already assassinated. And before that there was no movement at all. Lu Xun was silent for a moment, then said, pass down the order, don't let anyone be alone, everyone should stay together. At this moment his expression suddenly changed. The next moment he turned around abruptly. A few dozen feet away from him, a true Imperial Spell Realm expert slowly fell to the ground. The true Imperial Spell Realm expert's eyes were wide open, filled with disbelief. Lu Xun's expression was extremely gloomy. Someone had actually assassinated an expert from the Realm Defense Alliance in front of him, and he hadn't noticed at all. All the experts from the Realm Defense Alliance had solemn expressions as well. After all, Lu Xun was right here, but Lu Xun hadn't noticed anything. If even Lu Xun couldn't notice, then their expressions changed when they thought of this. Calm down. Lu Xun suddenly spoke coldly, it's just an assassin. As he spoke, he glanced coldly at the surroundings. Who exactly are you? Do you only know how to hide in the dark? Right at this moment, the head of a true defense realm expert flew into the air not far from Lu Xun's left. Blood sprayed out like a fountain. At the same time, Exalted Lord Lu suddenly vanished and appeared before the true defense realm expert. He clenched his fists tightly before pressing them down lightly. In an instant, a powerful aura suddenly surged out with him at the center, and it caused the entire sky to tremble. However, there was nothing. A moment later, the aura released by Lu Xun gradually calmed down, and the surroundings were silent. Lu Xun slowly closed his eyes, and all the experts from the Realm Defense Alliance around him were extremely vigilant. At this time, the 2 protectors of the Realm Defense Alliance appeared with 8 golden-robed experts. These 8 people and the 2 protectors looked around vigilantly. A moment later, the left protector looked at Lu Xun, soundless. Lu Xun nodded. This person attacked right in front of me, but I couldn't feel his aura at all. Even the mistress of the dark world couldn't do this. This person shouldn't be an assassin from the firmament world. The left protector frowned slightly. Could it be an assassin that the firmament sword sect invited from the outer domain? Lu Xun shook his head. I don't know. The left protector said in a low voice, we can't go on like this. Otherwise our people will fall into disarray. As he spoke, he looked at the firmament sword sect below. Should we act now? Lu Xun shook his head. If we act now with this person's methods, more of our people will die. At this moment, a few dozen feet away, a golden-robed expert's expression suddenly changed, and in the next moment he slammed his palms forward. Boom. Following a muffled sound, a silhouette flashed across the space. However, from the golden-robed expert's throat, a stream of blood spurted out. Lu Xun's figure flickered, and he appeared in front of the golden-robed expert. The expert stared fixedly at him, his body trembling violently. Lu Xun turned around to look, but there was still nothing in front of him. At this moment, Lu Xun's heart was really flustered. This golden-robed expert was a myriad empty realm expert. Even an expert of this level was assassinated. Who was it? Lu Xun's gaze swept across the surroundings and his expression was extremely cold. Who are you? Why are you going against the Realm Defense Alliance? There was no response from the surroundings. Just as Lu Xun was about to speak again, a few dozen feet to the left, the head of a true defensive realm expert flew into the air. Seeing this scene, everyone's expression changed and they all gathered together. In the dark, Yi Xian was about to make another move, but at this moment, an invisible pressure suddenly appeared in the sky. After this pressure appeared, the entire sky became illusory. This pressure descended layer by layer as if the sky was collapsing, and it wanted to crush the entire world. It's here. The leader of the Realm Defense Alliance has arrived. Within the Firmament Sword sect, Lin Songyun sighed, it's over. P.S. Some people say that I'm thick-skinned, is that true? Chapter 337. In the sky above the Grey Sword sect, the presence grew stronger and stronger. Though the leader has yet to show himself, everyone knew he was here. Below, Yi Xian lifted his head to look at the sky. At this moment, there was only one thought in his mind. Fight. He knew the person who was about to appear was very strong, not someone he could fight against right now. But he had no other choice. At this time Lin Songyun appeared next to Yi Xian. He lifted his head to look at the sky and asked in a soft voice, "Do you regret it?" Yi Xian smiled. "Regret what?" Lin Songyun answered, "Regret that I didn't leave." Yi Xian shook his head. "I'm not happy with Senior. It is true that I am a little afraid of death and I don't want to die. But I do not regret not leaving." Lin Songyun glanced at Yi Xian. "With your potential, you will leave this world for at most a few decades. At that time, even the leader of the Realm Protection Alliance will not be your opponent." Yi Xian whispered, "At that time will anyone from the Grey Sword sect still be alive?" Lin Songyun said in a low voice, "Even if you are here it won't help, right?" Yi Xian nodded. "Senior is right. But I am willing to face everything together with them." Then he looked at Lin Songyun. "The Realm Protection Alliance will not make things difficult for Senior. Senior can leave now. These are my sincere words." Lin Songyun shook his head. "I originally wanted to leave but I have decided to stay." What? Yi Xian didn't understand. Lin Songyun smiled. "To gamble. I bet that you and the Grey Sword sect will win this time." When? Yi Xian lifted his head to look at the sky. Feeling the terrifying pressure, even he himself was a little lost. Could he win? Moments later Yi Xian shook his head. In this world one only needs to try one's best. As for the result he will face it calmly. As long as one tries one's best, there will be no regrets. At this time Qin Beihan and the others walked out. Feeling the terrifying pressure in the sky, everyone's expression was solemn. To the cultivators of the Azure Firmament world, such a strong cultivator was like a god. At this moment, Lord Lu suddenly appeared above the crowd. He looked down and his gaze landed on Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, do you feel it? To my Realm Defense Alliance you are nothing but an ant." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Supreme Lord Lu, you have been a famous expert for a long time. Today I, Yi Xian, would like to challenge you. I wonder if you dare to fight with me." Challenging High Lord Lu. Hearing this, everyone around was shocked. Qin Beihan and the others below were also shocked. Obviously they did not expect Yi Xian to challenge Lord Lu. Qin Beihan looked at Yi Xian and said in a deep voice, "Don't be rash." Yi Xian smiled and said, "I'm not being impulsive. I just want to see if Azure Firmament World Supreme Lord Lu is really strong or if he only knows how to talk." In the air, Lord Lu looked down at Yi Xian and said mockingly, "Do you think you are worthy to challenge me?" Yi Xian suddenly shot up into the sky and came in front of Lord Lu. He looked at Lord Lu and said, "Just one sentence, do you want to fight or not?" Everyone turned to look at Lord Lu. Lord Lu stared at Yi Xian and said, "No matter what made you arrogant enough to challenge me, you will regret it very soon." As soon as he finished speaking, a powerful pressure suddenly swept out from his body. This pressure was like a wave that crushed towards Yi Xian. In the distance Yi Xian was expressionless. He took a step forward and a sword essence suddenly appeared in front of him. This sword essence forcefully blocked Lord Lu's pressure. When he saw this sword essence, Lord Lu's face changed. Sword essence turning into heaven and earth. You are a sword celestial. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Hearing this, everyone in the surroundings was stunned. Sword celestial? A sword immortal? Everyone looked at Yi Xian, including the experts from Pale Sword Sect, and looked at Yi Xian. In the air Yi Xian opened his palm and a sword appeared in his hand. All the sword essence in the surroundings gathered towards the sword in his hand. Buzz! A sword's hum suddenly resounded in the sky. Yi Xian pointed his sword at Lord Lu. "Come and fight." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly disappeared. In the next moment, a sword light suddenly slashed down from Lord Lu's head. Below, Lord Lu narrowed his eyes and a cold light flashed in his eyes. In the next moment he stomped his right foot and shot up into the sky, meeting the sword with his fist. Bang! In the sky, an explosion sounded like a clap of thunder. Then, a figure retreated hundreds of feet away. This person was Yi Xian. After stopping, Yi Xian suddenly held a sword in his hand and pointed at Lord Lu's waist. In the next moment, countless sword lights suddenly pierced the space around Lord Lu. Instant space sword. Seeing the sudden appearance of these swords, Lord Lu frowned and slammed his right hand in front of him. Rumble. The entire sky shook violently. In an instant, countless sword lights shattered and a sword suddenly appeared above Lord Lu's head. Lord Lu raised both of his arms to block the attack. Bang! Under everyone's gaze, Lord Lu retreated hundreds of feet away. Everyone gasped at the sight of this scene. Shock. At this moment, everyone was shocked. Who was Lord Lu? He was one of the top experts in the firmament world. What about Yi Xian? Yi Xian was not even 20 years old. A 20-year-old sword immortal? A 20-year-old fighting against a void-piercing realm cultivator? Even in the entire history of the firmament world, this was rare. A monster. A real monster. At this moment, the forces behind the Realm Protection Alliance were a little afraid. If Yi Xian did not die once he grew up, who would be able to stop Yi Xian? At this thought, many people looked at Yi Xian with murderous intent. Of course, there were also some who wanted to retreat. This kind of monster was too terrifying. Below, countless Firmament Sword sect disciples and elders were wild with joy. A sword immortal who was not even 20 years old. This was an existence comparable to the founder of the Firmament world. With Yi Xian around, the Firmament Sword sect would definitely prosper. In the air, Lord Lu stared at Yi Xian with a ferocious expression. Yi Xian, oh Yi Xian. You've really surprised me a bit. I thought that you were at most at the true defense realm. I never expected that not only did you reach the true defense realm, but you also became a sword immortal. If you were given 10 years, I'm afraid no one in the firmament world would be a match for you. Unfortunately, you don't have the time. Yi Xian smiled. Then I hope that Lord Lu can kill me. As you wish. As soon as Lord Lu finished his sentence, he disappeared from where he stood. The next moment, a shadow suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Then a palm print landed on Yi Xian's head. At this moment, the space around Yi Xian cracked. Obviously, this Lord Lu had really given it his all. This was because Yi Xian's talent really made him afraid. If he did not get rid of Yi Xian now, the Realm Protection Alliance would be doomed in the future. Below the palm print, Yi Xian's expression was calm. Suddenly, he stabbed upwards with his sword. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. One sword to determine life and death. Now that he had become a sword immortal, the power of this one sword to determine life and death had instantly increased by many times. With this one sword, the space that the sword passed through instantly cracked. This one sword had the power of the void-piercing realm. Boom. All of a sudden, the entire sky shook violently as if thunder had exploded. Then two figures retreated rapidly. These two figures were Yi Xian and Lord Lu. Yi Xian stopped after retreating more than 200 feet while Lord Lu only retreated less than 100 feet. Obviously, in this confrontation, Yi Xian was at a disadvantage. Yi Xian raised his head to look at Lord Lu in the distance with a serious expression. At this moment, his entire right arm had lost all feeling. Not only that, but the sword in his hand also had cracks. That was the injury caused by the power of dark matter. Opposite Yi Xian, Lord Lu's expression was also somewhat serious. This was because he had used all his strength in the punch just now. His goal was to kill Yi Xian with one punch to prevent future troubles. However, Yi Xian took this punch. He took it. Lord Lu took a deep breath and a murderous intent surged in his eyes. This Yi Xian must die. The next moment, Lord Lu suddenly flew out. A gust of powerful energy suddenly gathered in his right arm. When he arrived in front of Yi Xian, he suddenly made a seal with his right hand. The next moment, he gently shook his arm forward. Rumble. As soon as the seal was formed, the space in front of Yi Xian instantly distorted. Then there was a violent tremor and countless cracks appeared in the space. Space turbulence. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene. However, he didn't panic and he hurriedly activated the spatial Dao laws. In an instant, the space in the surroundings actually started to heal by itself, and in less than half a breath of time, all the cracks in space had healed completely. At this moment, everyone was stunned. Even Lord Lu was dumbfounded. He looked at Yi Xian in disbelief. This is impossible. How can you repair space? Not only Lord Lu, but Qin Beihan and the others below were also confused. One should know that they could break space, but it was impossible for them to repair space themselves. However, Yi Xian had done it. This did not make sense. In the air, Lord Lu stared at Yi Xian. How did you do it? Do you want to know? Yi Xian asked with a smile. Lord Lu stared at Yi Xian. How did you do it? Yi Xian grinned. Call me Grandpa and I will tell you. Lord Lu's expression turned cold. You have a death wish. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged at Yi Xian. In the distance, the corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up. In the next moment, the power of space suddenly gathered towards him. In the blink of an eye, a sword was formed. The sword of space. When the sword of space was formed, Yi Xian grabbed it. At the same time, the good and evil sword intense surged into the sword of space. In front of Yi Xian, Lord Lu's expression changed drastically when he saw the sword of space in Yi Xian's hand. His intuition told him that he was in danger. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly slashed at him with the sword. The space trembled as the sword passed. It was resonating. After a moment of silence, a ray of sword light suddenly exploded in the sky. Then a figure frantically retreated. This retreat was no less than 1,000 feet away. This person was Lord Lu. Lord Lu lost? Everyone was petrified on the spot. End of this chapter. Chapter 338. Defeated? Everyone was in disbelief, including Qin Beihan and the others. At this moment, their faces were filled with astonishment. Especially Qin Beihan. He was well aware of Lord Lu's strength. It could be said that in the entire firmament world, there weren't many who could defeat Lord Lu. And these people were all existences at the level of old monsters. And Yi Xian wasn't even 20 years old. How was this possible? In the air, Lord Lu's eyes were a little dazed. He had indeed been defeated in that strike. He had been pushed back hundreds of meters by Yi Xian's sword. Although he hadn't been completely defeated, he had been defeated. Being pushed back by a young junior with a single strike, if that wasn't defeat, then what was? At this moment, Lord Lu wasn't angry nor exasperated. On the contrary, he was very calm. He looked at Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's face was pale, and his body was trembling slightly. Lord Lu looked straight at Yi Xian. If I'm not wrong, that strike just now consumed a lot of your strength, right? Yi Xian was silent. Just as Lord Lu had said, that strike just now had consumed a lot of his strength. However, the power of that strike had exceeded his expectations. Before this, he had never used the Sword of Space. Therefore, he had no idea about the power of the Sword of Space. At this moment, when he used that strike, he knew that it could seriously injure a void-piercing realm expert. In the distance, Lord Lu suddenly said, Yi Xian, I have to say that my Realm Defense Alliance has greatly underestimated you from the beginning. You're even more monstrous than we thought. As he spoke, he glanced at the Firmament Sword sect below and continued, if we allow you to continue to grow, the Firmament Sword sect will have another Firmament Sword Master in the future. There was silence all around. At this moment, there were nearly 100 experts gathered around the Firmament Sword sect, and all of them were true Imperial Law Realm experts. They were all from various forces. At this moment, everyone was looking at Yi Xian. In the past, although Yi Xian had some fame, it was only in the younger generation. But now it was different. Yi Xian's strength could not be compared to the older generation. Right now, Yi Xian wasn't even 20 years old. If he was given more time, he would definitely become the second Firmament Sword Master. Thinking of this, killing intent gradually appeared in their eyes. By coming here, it meant that they were standing on the side of the Realm Protection Alliance. And if Yi Xian did not die today, he would settle the score in the future. Yi Xian must die. Right at this moment, someone shouted from the surroundings. Aside from the Ashen Sword sect, when everyone else looked at Yi Xian, their eyes were either icy cold or filled with dense killing intent. Eliminate Yi Xian. At this moment, no longer. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Just the Realm Protection Alliance alone wanted to eliminate Yi Xian. Below, Qin Beihan and the others had already appeared around Yi Xian. At this moment, they could already feel the killing intent of the surrounding experts. Qin Beihan said solemnly, Yi Xian, later, no matter what, you have to leave the Firmament Sword sect. Do you understand? Yi Xian was about to shake his head when Yu Qi suddenly said, if you leave, even if we all die, we will be happy in our hearts. Do you understand? Yi Xian shook his head, I am not happy. Yu Qi's beautiful eyes were filled with anger. Why are you so disobedient? Yi Xian smiled bitterly, Master, I can't leave now. Look at these people, which one of them will let me leave? Yu Qi was silent. At this moment, Jian Xian suddenly said, then let's fight. Stay and fight with these people. Whether we live or die, let the heavens decide. Yi Xian nodded. This was also what he was thinking at this moment. Although there were many people in his heart that he was reluctant to part with and there were many people that he missed, he had no choice. There were some things that he had to do. Beside Lu's supremacy, the left protector suddenly said, if we attack now, Firmament Sword sect will have no way to survive. And if we drag this out, the surrounding people will change their minds. At that time, Lu's supremacy looked at the sky. The pressure was getting heavier and heavier. Obviously, his lord's real body was about to descend. Thinking of this, Lu's supremacy suddenly waved his right hand, attack. As his voice fell, the experts from the Realm Protection Alliance directly rushed down towards the Blue Sword sect below. The experts from the other forces also hesitated for a moment before they also followed suit. More than 100 true Imperial Dharma Realm experts. How terrifying was this lineup? Below, Jin Shen suddenly laughed. Come, let's fight to our heart's content. As his voice fell, he held his sword and soared into the sky. In the air, a true Imperial Dharma Realm expert's head directly flew off. Beside Lu's supremacy, the left and right protectors immediately surrounded Jian Shen. Below, Qin Beihan said softly, Brothers and sisters, let's meet again in the next life. As his voice fell, he waved his right hand and soared up with his sword. Not far from Yi Xian, Gu Shaoxian said softly, Let's meet again in the next life. As soon as she said this, her body trembled slightly. Countless rays of sword light shot out from her body. In an instant, the rays of sword light filled the sky. Sword array. Using one's body as a sword array. Needless to say, the power of this sword formation was extremely great. Unfortunately, she was facing too many experts. As soon as the sword array appeared, it was directly blasted by the combined attacks of more than a dozen experts. On the other side, Zhang Tai and the others also soared into the sky and met the experts in the sky. Crushed. As soon as the battle began, Firmament Sword Sect's side was crushed. Because in terms of numbers, Firmament Sword Sect's side was far inferior. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Yes. Rumble. At this moment, a deafening explosion suddenly sounded in the sky. Then a figure slowly fell from the sky. When he saw the figure, Yi Xian was instantly stunned. This person was Zhang Tai. In the air, Zhang Tai suddenly turned his head to look at Yi Xian and grinned. Shameless Yi, if you are still alive after today, remember to go to the weapon forging peak. There is something left for you there. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned to look at the dozen people who were rushing down from the sky and laughed maniacally. Come on. As soon as he finished speaking, his body suddenly expanded. The next moment, boom. Zhang Tai suddenly exploded. A powerful ray of sword light swept across the sky. The two people who were leading the dozen people were directly torn into pieces by the ray of sword light. The rest of them also retreated frantically. Self-destruction. At this moment, Yi Xian's mind went blank. Gone? Just like that? On the other side, a figure suddenly flew out. The person who flew out was Lian Bixian. Yi Xian hurriedly trembled. He was about to help, but at this moment, a figure suddenly blocked in front of him. He knew this person. He was the Dean of Firmament Academy, Qiu Yuan. Qiu Yuan looked coldly at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, do you still remember how mighty you were in my Firmament Academy? Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Qiu Yuan's expression changed drastically. He suddenly swung the black ruler in his hand forward, and an expanse of black ink light rippled out. However, it was slashed apart by Yi Xian's sword. Seeing this scene, Qiu Yuan was shocked. He hurriedly retreated. At this moment, more than a dozen true Imperial Realm experts surrounded him. Rumble. A series of explosions suddenly rang out in the sky. Then Yi Xian retreated hundreds of feet away. Just as he was about to make a move, a burst of laughter suddenly came from the other side. As the laughter rang out, an earth-shattering explosion suddenly rang out. Yi Xian turned his head to look. Not far away in the sky, a beam of sword light shook the sky, and in the middle of that beam of sword light, it was Lian Bixian. At this moment, Lian Bixian was looking at Firmament Sword Sect below. His eyes were filled with reluctance and regret. Gradually, he completely disappeared in the sky. Yi Xian was stunned. As if he thought of something, he hurriedly turned around. Not far away, Gu Shaoxian and Yu Qi were being besieged by more than 20 true Imperial Realm experts. The two women were almost unable to hold on any longer. At this moment, Yu Qi suddenly looked in the direction of Yi Xian. She smiled. Take care. As soon as she finished speaking, she pointed at the space between her eyebrows. In an instant, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from her body. Self-destruction. P.S. Ask for a ticket. End of this chapter. Chapter 339. Self-destruct. Against so many experts, Yu Qi and the rest had no way of contending against them. If they self-destructed, they could at least drag a few down with them. Therefore, Zhang Tai had no choice, Lian Bixian had no choice, and Yu Qi had no choice. Just as Yi Xian was about to self-destruct, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of Yu Qi. He pressed down on Yu Qi's shoulder, and in an instant, a powerful sword will forcefully suppress the power that was about to explode from within Yu Qi's body. Yu Qi looked at Yi Xian and softly said, "Why bother? Yi Xian shook his head and turned around. In front of him there were more than 10 true Imperial Law Realm experts. Gradually Yi Xian smiled. As he laughed, a powerful force suddenly rippled out of Yi Xian's body. When this force appeared, all of the strong people in the world looked at it one after another. On Yi Xian's brow, an illusory Xiaota quietly appeared. Prison Pagoda. When the prison pagoda appeared, the entire world changed, and the powerful pressure that was originally in the air instantly disappeared without a trace. In its place was a new pressure, the true might of heaven and earth. No, even the might of heaven and earth was not this terrifying. Everyone looked at Yi Xian in shock, or more accurately at the illusory Xiaota on Yi Xian's brow. What treasure was this? Gradually Yi Xian's expression became ferocious, and in the next instant he roared, "Withdraw!" As his voice fell, the more than 20 true Imperial Law Realm experts in front of Yi Xian suddenly disappeared, and when they reappeared they were already in the prison pagoda. The more than 20 people looked around in shock. They were about to rush out, but at this time, a blood-red prison word suddenly appeared above their heads. As this word appeared, no one in the prison pagoda could move. At this moment, everyone was shocked. Very quickly, screams rang out from the first level of the prison pagoda. A moment later, all the experts in the first level of the World Prison Pagoda had disappeared without a trace. Outside the prison pagoda, Lu Supremacy and the others stared at Yi Xian in shock. At this moment, their hearts were in utter shock. More than 20 true defensive magic realm experts disappeared in front of them just like that. Everyone knew that this was Yi Xian's doing. Countless experts retreated, distancing themselves from Yi Xian. At this moment, when they looked at Yi Xian, their eyes were filled with deep fear. Lord Lu glared at Yi Xian. "How did you do it?" Yi Xian didn't answer. At this moment, his hands were trembling slightly and his head was spinning. At this moment, he could already feel that something in the prison pagoda seemed to have loosened. He knew very well that the seal had loosened. Every time he used the World Prison Pagoda, the seal would loosen. Once the seal loosened, the existences within the World Prison Pagoda would come out. However, he had no other choice. Lord Lu stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "What exactly is that treasure of yours?" "The treasure." When they heard this word, the gazes of many people in the surroundings instantly burned slightly with desire. Yi Xian grinned. "Based on your gazes, it seems like you want that treasure." The others in the surroundings gazed at Yi Xian silently, but their gazes were sufficient to explain everything. Right at this moment, someone suddenly said, "Yi Xian, where did you take them?" Yi Xian gazed at that person and smiled. "Take a guess." That person's expression changed, and he was just about to speak when the left protector by Lu Supremacy's side spoke abruptly. "He's buying time. He's buying time on purpose. He definitely exhausted a huge amount of energy by activating that treasure first. He's at his weakest right now." When they heard the left protector, the fear in their eyes gradually turned icy cold as they gazed at Yi Xian. Suddenly Lu Supremacy said, "Attack." As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished on the spot. Obviously he intended to attack himself. A wisp of a ferocious smile arose on the corners of Yi Xian's mouth, and he was about to attack. However, a ray of white light suddenly shot down from the horizon. The white light was extremely swift, and it instantly arrived in front of Yi Xian. The white light dispersed to reveal a woman in a white dress before Yi Xian. Enlancio. Enlancio took a step forward, and the space in front of her trembled violently as soon as it descended. After that, a formidable force surged out from that expanse of space in front of her. Bang! This force forcefully stopped Lu Supremacy on the spot. Lu Supremacy gazed at Enlancio while his eyes narrowed slightly. "You're that expert from the Yin clan." Enlancio nodded. Lu Supremacy said in a low voice, "What? Your Yin clan intends to stand on the side of the Firmament Sword sect?" Enlancio shook her head. "It's my own business and it isn't related to the Yin clan." As soon as she finished speaking, her figure suddenly turned illusory. On the other hand, Lu Supremacy's expression changed abruptly, and then he suddenly slapped his palm forward. As soon as his palm descended, a formidable force swept out like a torrent from his palm. Meanwhile, Enlancio arrived before him. She pointed out with a finger, and the space there trembled violently before rippling forward like a wave. Bang! The entire sky trembled violently, and then a figure retreated explosively repeatedly. It was Lu Supremacy. He lost again? Everyone in the surroundings gazed at Enlancio with slight disbelief. Where did this genius come from? Lu Supremacy glanced at his palm. At this moment, his palm had split apart, and fresh blood was flowing incessantly from it. After a short moment of silence, Lu's Supremacy raised his head to gaze at Enlancio who stood nearby, and he had a slightly complicated expression on his face. It really is the saying that geniuses appear in every generation. Enlancio paid no attention to Lu's Supremacy. She turned around and walked over to Yi Xian, and she grinned as she gazed at Yi Xian's pale face. Long time no see. Long time no see. Yi Xian chuckled, you're much stronger than before. Enlancio chuckled, aren't you the same? I just never imagined that you'd become someone that everyone in the world wants to kill. Yi Xian shook his head, you shouldn't have gotten involved in this. You'll drag your own clan down with you. Enlancio spoke softly, that's quite estranged. Yi Xian laughed bitterly, all right then I won't talk about it. Meanwhile Lu's Supremacy spoke abruptly, Missin, does your own clan know that you've done this? Enlancio turned around to gaze at Lu's Supremacy, I've said it before. This is my own business and it has nothing to do with the Yin clan. Lu's Supremacy spoke solemnly, since it's like that, then don't blame my Realm Defense Alliance for not giving the Yin clan any face. As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand, kill. Leave no one alive. As soon as Lord Lu's order resounded, the true defensive spell realm experts in the surroundings charged towards Yi Xian's group once more. Enlancio's face remained emotionless as she gazed at the experts that were charging over. She slowly clenched her right hand tightly and suddenly, her figure seemed like a wisp of smoke that drifted away. In the next moment, numerous afterimages suddenly appeared in the distance. They were all afterimages of Enlancio. Numerous shrill cries resounded in the distance, and every single one of them represented the fall of a true Imperial Magical Realm expert. Lu's Supremacy's face sank when he saw this scene. Enlancio's strength wasn't inferior to Yi Xian at all. After a moment of silence, Lu's Supremacy turned to look to the side. Beside him, 3 golden-robed experts were charging towards Enlancio. 3 void-piercing realm experts. As these 3 experts attacked, Enlancio was instantly restrained. On the other hand, some experts in the surroundings charged towards Yi Xian. Right at this moment, Xiaoling suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw Xiaoling and then he hurriedly said, it's dangerous. Go in quickly. Xiaoling blinked and nodded, all right. As soon as she finished speaking, she ran back in. But it wasn't long before she ran out again. She gazed at Yi Xian, hesitated for a moment and said, I'll help you beat up a baddie. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and punched towards the distance. Bang. With this punch, a true defense Dharma realm expert that was hundreds of feet away was sent flying hundreds of feet away. Xiaoling blinked when she witnessed this scene. She glanced at her fist and then she gazed at Yi Xian. Am I that formidable? Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. No. He's too weak. He's too weak. As he spoke, he turned around and slashed down with his sword. The head of a true Imperial Magical Realm expert in the distance flew into the air. Yi Xian pointed at the head that had flown away. Look, isn't it because he's too weak? Xiaoling blinked and was doubtful. Right at this moment, Exalt Lu suddenly spoke fiercely, the Quintessence Core. All the experts of the Realm Defense Alliance looked at Xiaoling when they heard Exalt Lu. Meanwhile, Exalt Lu suddenly charged towards Xiaoling. Xiaoling shuddered, and then she turned around and ran into the pagoda. Yi Xian laughed bitterly. Little girl, are you trying to help me or harm me? Because along with the appearance of Xiaoling, the experts of the Realm Defense Alliance had charged towards her. Just at this moment, Yu Qi blocked in front of Yi Xian. She was about to speak when Yi Xian pulled her behind him. Yu Qi looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, if I have to die, then let me die first. As he spoke, he charged out with his sword. Looking at Yi Xian charging out, Yu Qi's eyes gradually turned blank. In the distance, after Yi Xian charged out, he was instantly surrounded by a dozen true Imperial Magical Realm experts. Although he could instantly kill a true Imperial Magical Realm expert, it was still extremely difficult for him to fight a dozen of them at once. Although Tsang Sword Sect had fewer people, they were all swordsmen and were extremely strong. Therefore, even if they were suppressed, they still had the strength to fight. About a quarter of an hour later, a powerful pressure suddenly appeared on the horizon again. Along with the appearance of this pressure, all the experts in the sky above Tsang World Sect stopped and raised their heads to look at the horizon. Very quickly, a shadow suddenly appeared in the horizon. Seeing this shadow, the experts from the Realm Defense Alliance were overjoyed. As for those from Tsang Sword Sect, their expressions became extremely solemn. Gradually, the shadow became more and more real. After 15 minutes, the shadow completely solidified. Then a white-haired middle-aged man appeared in the sky. Master. Seeing this white-haired man, all the experts from the Realm Defense Alliance knelt down and said in unison, "Greetings, Master." Chapter 340. My lord. Despair appeared in the eyes of countless Pale Sword Sect disciples when they saw the white-haired man. Earlier, although the Pale Sword Sect was suppressed, they could still fight. But now, along with the appearance of this white-haired man, everyone knew that there was no hope. There was no hope at all. At this moment Yi Xian was at a loss. The white-haired man stood in midair without any aura. It was like he was one with the world and was unfathomable. The white-haired man had his hands behind his back as he looked down. His eyes were filled with indifference as if he was looking at an ant. At this moment, the white-haired man suddenly said, "If the Sword Master of the Pale Sword Sect was still here, then he would barely have some consciousness." Unfortunately, as he spoke, he shook his head slightly. "Didn't your Pale Sword Sect have a celestial slaying sword formation? Come, I'll give all of you a chance to activate the sword formation." It was confidence and also contempt. In the sky above the Pale Sword Sect, Qin Beihan swept the Pale Sword Sect with his gaze. Presently the Pale Sword Sect was in a mess. A moment later Qin Beihan spoke softly, "The future is unknown, but it's enough to try my best. Disciples of the Pale Sword Sect, listen up. Men can die, swords can break, but the backbone of my Pale Sword Sect can't be broken." As soon as he finished speaking, he stomped his right foot lightly and shot into the sky. A sword hum resounded through the sky. In the sky, the white-haired man's expression was calm. "Ant." As soon as he finished speaking, his right hand pressed down lightly. A golden beam of light descended from the sky, and when the sword light came into contact with the golden beam of light, it was instantly transformed into nothingness. After the sword light disappeared, Qin Beihan roared with laughter, "Bring it on." As soon as he finished speaking, his stomach suddenly swelled up. In the next moment, bang! A deafening explosion resounded in the sky, and then a powerful force suddenly exploded in the sky. Everywhere this force passed, space trembled as if it was about to shatter. It was extremely shocking. Self-destruction. Qin Beihan was a peak expert, so how terrifying was the force of his self-destruction? A powerful force swept towards the white-haired man. It was simply apocalyptic. On the other hand, the white-haired man's expression was still calm. When the energy arrived before him, he stretched out his right hand and pressed it down lightly. This press seemed like the entire sky had sunk down, and a shapeless pressure directly crushed the energy. The sky regained its calm. Seeing this scene, countless experts in the surroundings were shocked. The Supreme Realm. This is definitely a Supreme Realm. So strong, this Pale Sword Sect is doomed today. The Azure Sword Sect and this Yi Xian are truly overestimating themselves. On the other side, all the Ashen Sword Sect disciples had grief and indignation on their faces. Besides grief and indignation, there was also despair. Qin Beihan's self-destruct attack had been easily blocked. An expert of this level was like a god to everyone. At the side, Yi Xian was silent. He knew that against a powerhouse of this level, even if he summoned the pagoda, it would be of no use. It was not that the pagoda wasn't strong enough, it was that he himself wasn't strong enough. He was truly helpless against such an expert. Right at this moment, Jian Xian suddenly walked towards the white-haired man. Everyone looked at Jian Xian, and the white-haired man's gaze descended onto Jian Xian as well. As he gazed at Jian Xian, the white-haired man spoke indifferently, "You aren't bad. Unfortunately, you're still too weak." Jian Xian spoke indifferently, "Is that so?" As he spoke, he suddenly formed a seal with his hand, and then he tapped the space between his brows. A sword howl resounded abruptly in the sky, and then an illusory sword suddenly appeared between the sword immortal's brows under the gazes of countless people. Yu Qi, who stood by Yi Xian's side, spoke with slight disbelief, "One with the sword." "One with the sword?" Yi Xian gazed at Yu Qi, "What's one with the sword?" Yu Qi spoke in a low voice, "It's a realm in the Sword Dao above the Great Sword Immortal Realm. I never expected that eldest senior brother would have actually cultivated it successfully." As she spoke, she raised her head to look at Jian Xian in the sky, and her brows knit together tightly. In midair, the white-haired man's brows knit together slightly as well, but he quickly relaxed. "One with the sword." "No, it isn't true, one with the sword. However, it's extremely rare. If you're given 10 years of time, then perhaps you'll really be able to fight me. Unfortunately, you're too weak now." Jian Xian raised his head and looked directly at the white-haired man. In the next moment, The aura within his body rose explosively. At the same time, a strand of sword intent shot into the sky. Yuqi's countenance instantly turned pale when he witnessed this scene. The white-haired man stared fixedly at Jian Xian. "You're improving your cultivation regardless of the consequences. Looks like you're prepared to die." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly pressed his fingers together and pointed downwards. An expanse of space suddenly split open, and then an enormous finger emerged from within it. As soon as this enormous finger appeared, the entire space in the sky became illusory. The energy contained within it caused this expanse of space to be slightly unable to endure it. Jian Xian suddenly transformed into a ray of light that shot into the sky, and everywhere it passed, space was actually directly torn apart. Under the gazes of countless people, this ray of light slashed directly onto the enormous finger. Bang! The entire sky trembled violently while the enormous finger rumbled and shattered. After that, a sword arrived before the white-haired man. The white-haired man stretched out his right hand, and his palm forcefully blocked Jian Xian's attack. Jian Xian suddenly shouted furiously, "Break!" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly spun his sword forward. Meanwhile, the white-haired man smashed his left hand forward. Bang! With a single punch, the sword shattered and Jian Xian was blasted flying. Jian Xian flew over 1 kilometer away, but he hadn't even stopped when the white-haired man suddenly appeared in front of him, and then a palm pressed against Jian Xian's stomach. In an instant, Jian Xian's entire body became illusory. The white-haired man gazed calmly at Jian Xian. "Do you feel the strength of my palm? This is the difference between a god and an ant. Understand?" As soon as he finished speaking, he withdrew his right hand, and Jian Xian's body gradually became illusory. When he was about to vanish completely, he suddenly spoke softly, "Master, I'm useless." It didn't take long for Jian Xian to vanish completely. Jian Xian had died in battle. And now, there were only 6 true Imperial Dharma Realm experts on the Pale Sword sect's side. Among the Pale Mountain 6 Sword Immortals, only Yuqi, Gu Shaoxian and Sang Xian were left. Among them, Sang Xian was seriously injured. The Pale Sword sect was defeated. They were defeated without any suspense. All around, everyone looked at Yi Xian below. Everyone knew that the monster in front of them would die prematurely today. And in a year or two no one would remember who Yi Xian was. In the air, the white-haired man looked at Yi Xian. He sized up Yi Xian and nodded slightly. "You're a sword immortal at such a young age and you've even reached the true Imperial Dharma realm. Your talent is even better than Jian Xian's." As he spoke he looked around. "I heard that there's an expert behind you. You can call her out. I want to see her." At this moment Lin Songyun, who was beside Yi Xian, suddenly stood up. He looked at the white-haired man. "Sir, believe me, you don't want to see her." The white-haired man looked at Lin Songyun indifferently. "Spirit Void Star Palace?" Lin Songyun nodded. "That's right." The white-haired man said calmly, "I've heard of it before." Lin Songyun shook his head with a smile. "It seems that you haven't heard much." The white-haired man retracted his gaze. He scanned the surroundings before his eyes landed on Yi Xian. "Why, she still doesn't want to come out?" "A mysterious woman." Yi Xian chuckled. The next moment he suddenly soared into the sky, sword in hand, and slashed at the white-haired man. Seeing that Yi Xian had actually attacked, the experts of the Realm Defense Alliance immediately revealed looks of mockery. In the air, the white-haired man gently pressed down with his right hand. With this pressure, Yi Xian, who had just charged out, was directly pushed back to the ground. Boom! The ground beneath Yi Xian's feet trembled violently, and then it split apart. The white-haired man pointed a finger at Yi Xian. The space above Yi Xian suddenly split apart, and then a ray of golden light shot forward and blasted towards Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Lin Songyun suddenly appeared above Yi Xian, and then he swiftly swung his palm. Bang! Lin Songyun and Yi Xian were both blasted back repeatedly. After they stopped moving, a wisp of blood instantly seeped out from the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. The white-haired man was about to attack again when Enlancio suddenly appeared in front of him. The latter glanced at Enlancio and then a trace of surprise flashed through his eyes. "I never expected that besides Yi Xian, you're actually such a monstrous genius as well." Enlancio didn't speak. She suddenly vanished and in the next moment she was already in front of the white-haired man. However, she didn't even see the white-haired man attack. Yet Enlancio had directly retreated 300 m back. The white-haired man was just about to attack again when an old man suddenly appeared in front of Enlancio. The old man bowed slightly to the white-haired man. I'm the patriarch of the Yin clan and Zitian. My Yin clan has no intention of becoming enemies with the Realm Defense Alliance, so I hope that you can show mercy. The white-haired man glanced at Zitian. Too late. As soon as he finished speaking, he smashed his fist forward. The old man's expression changed drastically, and he placed his palms together before suddenly blasting them forward. This blast caused the space in front of him to tremble. Bang! The space around the old man collapsed, causing his expression to change drastically, and he hurriedly pulled Enlancio along as he retreated repeatedly. The white-haired man paid no attention to the old man and Enlancio, and he gazed at Yixin. Since she won't show herself, then I won't waste any more time. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly appeared in front of Yixin, and then a formidable force suddenly blasted towards Yixin. This force was so formidable that it wasn't something that Yixin could resist at this moment. However, Yixin didn't resign himself to death. He had a savage expression on his face and was prepared to fight desperately. Meanwhile, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. Was Yuqi. Yuqi suddenly slashed her sword forward, and a ray of sword light slashed down fiercely like a bolt of lightning. Bang! The sword instantly shattered into pieces, whereas Yuqi's figure had already appeared 300 m away. After she stopped moving, her body directly shattered apart. Yixin's mind instantly went blank when he witnessed this scene. In the distance, the white-haired man spoke indifferently, "Aunt." As soon as he finished speaking, he was about to attack again. However, Yixin suddenly roared furiously, and then a formidable pressure suddenly appeared in the heavens and the earth. An illusory shouta silently condensed between Yixin's brows. A horrified voice suddenly resounded from within the pagoda. It can't be activated. However, Yixin didn't care anymore. The prison pagoda within his body was trembling violently, and every single level was trembling as if something was vanishing. Outside, Yixin's body was twitching violently, and he was bleeding from all 7 apertures. It was an extremely shocking sight. Within the prison pagoda, powerful pressure suddenly appeared, and it was so strong that it was even stronger than the Realm Defense Alliance. It was countless times stronger than the Lord. Haha! Suddenly, roaring laughter resounded from within the pagoda. Right at this moment, the rightmost sword at the top of the prison pagoda suddenly trembled violently, and then a ray of sword light shook down from the top of the pagoda. In an instant, the entire prison pagoda returned to calm. Only the sword at the top of the pagoda was still trembling lightly, emitting a deep sword cry as if it was responding to something. P.S. I don't need tickets today. I'm begging for a girl. Chapter 341. Within the prison pagoda, all auras disappeared and everything returned to normal. It was abnormally calm. Outside the prison pagoda, Yixin had also gradually regained his composure. In the air, the white-haired man stared at Yixin with a serious look in his eyes. What was that thing between your eyebrows just now? Yixin ignored the white-haired man. He looked up at the sky and said softly, "Have you arrived?" The white-haired man followed Yixin's gaze and looked up. There was nothing there. At this time, his expression suddenly changed. He looked down and saw a woman in a plain dress had appeared in front of Yixin. Everyone was stunned, because no one knew how the woman had appeared. Not far away, Supreme Lord Lu's face became unprecedentedly serious when he saw this woman. A mysterious woman. She had finally appeared. Below, everyone's eyes fell on the woman. Lin Songyun hurriedly walked in front of the woman and bowed deeply. "Greetings, senior." The woman in the plain dress did not respond to anyone. She just looked at Yixin indifferently. But gradually her eyes softened. After a long time she said softly, "It's you." Obviously she was sure. Yixin pointed not far away. There, a soul was quietly floating. It was Yuqi's soul. Yixin said softly, "Can you save him?" The plainly dressed woman glanced at Yuqi. And at this time, the nearby Lin Songyun suddenly smiled bitterly. Little friend Yi, her fleshly body was destroyed. Although her soul was left behind, this soul is illusory and her consciousness has already vanished. Her life imprint is already gone. So, he didn't say anything else. Yixin didn't speak. He just looked at the woman. The woman looked at Yixin. "Her life or death has nothing to do with me." Yixin said solemnly, "She did it to save me." The woman turned to look at Yuqi's soul in the distance when she heard this. After a moment of silence, she raised her right hand lightly, and Yuqi's soul floated directly into her palm. She looked at Yuqi's soul in her palm with an expressionless face. Condense. As soon as she finished speaking, many specks of light suddenly gathered in her hand. Seeing this scene, Lin Songyun, who was not far away, was shocked and took several steps back. A person had a life imprint. Once the life imprint was broken, it meant the end of that person. But now, the woman in the plain dress had actually forcefully condensed this leaping life mark. This kind of method was already inhuman. After the woman in a plain dress condensed Yu Qi's soul, she pressed her right hand lightly against Yi Xian's chest, and the soul directly entered the World Prison Pagoda. Within the World Prison Pagoda, a strand of sword light enveloped Yu Qi's soul. With this strand of sword light protecting him, it could be said that he was impervious to all evils. Within the World Prison Pagoda, Xiao Ling gazed curiously at Yu Qi's soul. But it didn't take long for her to gaze at the woman outside the World Prison Pagoda, and her eyes shone with stars. Outside the World Prison Pagoda, the woman gazed at Yi Xian's chest for a long time. In the end she said softly, "She's doing this to suppress that pagoda, right?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." The woman fell silent for a moment and then she said, "Do you know what this pagoda is?" Yi Xian shook his head. The woman nodded slightly. "It's good that you don't know. It wouldn't make much sense for you to know now." As she spoke, she gazed at Yi Xian. "This pagoda is extraordinary, so it might not necessarily be a good thing for it to fall into your possession. However, since it's already in your possession, then there's no need to avoid it." Yi Xian nodded. "All right." The woman glanced at the surroundings. "Are they all people who want to kill you?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." The woman looked at Yi Xian and spoke indifferently. "What do you think?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and then he said, "If you're too outstanding, others will be jealous of you." The woman glanced at Yi Xian. "You're quite thick-skinned." On the other side, the left protector of the Realm Defense Alliance spoke abruptly. "I presume you're the sword immortal behind Yi Xian. The old man thought that you wouldn't appear." "You?" Right at this moment, the woman suddenly turned around and in the next moment, a ray of sword light pierced through the center of the left protector's forehead. The left protector's body stiffened. Everyone was dumbstruck. The woman looked at the stiff left protector with an emotionless expression. "We're talking, so why are you interrupting?" The left protector stared blankly at the woman. Even in death, his eyes were filled with disbelief. Because he still hadn't figured out how he died. On the other hand, everyone in the surroundings had their guards up. The woman's strength caused them to be grateful to the point of fear. At this time, the white-haired man in the air suddenly looked at Yi Xian. "I remember now." The white-haired man in front of Yi Xian stared at Yi Xian. "That pagoda on your forehead, it's an item on the Interstellar Bounty Board." Interstellar Bounty Board. Hearing the white-haired man's words, Lin Songyun's face changed. He looked at Yi Xian. "Little friend, that item of yours?" Yi Xian laughed bitterly. "I don't know what it is either." Lin Songyun spoke in a low voice. "If it's really an item on the Interstellar Bounty Board, then little friend, you must be careful. Because anything that can be on the Interstellar Bounty Board is definitely a treasure of heaven and earth. If little friend's item is ranked first, if news of this gets out, little friend," as he spoke up to hear, he seemed to have thought of something. He glanced at the woman and did not speak further. With this woman by Yi Xian's side, there wouldn't be any problems. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. How could he not understand Lin Songyun's meaning? Since the World Prison Pagoda appeared today, there would definitely be a lot of trouble in the future. In the air, the white-haired man looked at Yi Xian. "I didn't expect that you actually have such a treasure on you. This is a bargain for me." "A bargain for you?" The woman glanced at the white-haired man. "What kind of trash are you?" Hearing the woman's words, everyone was stunned. She actually dared to ask the alliance leader what kind of trash was he? In the air, the white-haired man stared at the woman. "It seems like you are very confident." As he spoke, he clasped his hands behind his back and looked down at the woman. "Come, let me see exactly what gives you such confidence." The woman suddenly appeared in front of the white-haired man. She stared at him. "You are so weak that you don't even have the thought of making me draw my sword." As the sound of her voice faded, she lightly stomped her right foot. Boom. The spectators watched as the white-haired man retreated explosively by over 3 kilometers. All the spectators were dumbstruck by this scene. At this moment, the white-haired man who was 3 kilometers away felt slight disbelief as well. Because his body had actually started to crack apart. At this moment he finally realized how terrifying this woman before him was. The white-haired man stared fixedly at the woman and was about to speak. However, the woman suddenly vanished once more. The white-haired man's expression changed drastically, and he swiftly slapped his right palm forward. Rumble. The entire sky trembled violently. Meanwhile, a figure was blasted flying. It was the white-haired man. At this moment, his arms had vanished. The faces of Exalt Lu and the others instantly turned pale when they witnessed this scene. The woman gazed calmly at the white-haired man. I didn't kill you because I was afraid you wouldn't realize how weak you are. Do you understand now? The white-haired man stared fixedly at the woman. Who exactly are you? The woman didn't speak and she lightly stomped her right foot once more. In the distance, the white-haired man's expression changed abruptly. In the next moment, he roared furiously, and a powerful force swept out from his body. However, the force shattered as soon as it appeared. Bang! Under the gazes of everyone, the white-haired man retreated repeatedly, and in the process, his body started to crack inch by inch. Over 1 kilometer away, the white-haired man's body had vanished, and only his soul remained. The woman glanced at the white-haired man. Do you realize how weak you are? The white-haired man's eyes were slightly dazed. Obviously, the woman's strength had far exceeded his expectations. On the other hand, the woman didn't kill the white-haired man right away. She walked slowly towards him. Meanwhile, the white-haired man suddenly looked at her. In the next moment he opened his palm, and a speck of light shot into the sky and shot into the boundless starry sky. The woman stopped moving, glanced at the starry sky and spoke indifferently, "You've finally called for help?" The white-haired man's expression was slightly unsightly. "You're intentionally waiting for me to call for help." The plain-clothed woman was expressionless. "To kill, we naturally have to kill them all." Hearing her words, the faces of the surrounding experts fell, and some turned around to leave. At this time, everyone knew that the Realm Protection Alliance was finished. Kill Yi Xian? Now they no longer had this thought in their minds. All they could think of now was to escape. Right at this moment, the nearby woman in a plain dress suddenly flicked her finger, and then a ray of sword light silently appeared at the end of the horizon. Chi. The heads of 6 or 7 true defensive Dharma Realm experts flew out. Seeing this, the rest of the people immediately stopped on the spot, not daring to move. The plainly dressed woman glanced at the people around her. "Did I say you could leave?" Hearing what was said, everyone's expression changed. Among them, the Dean of Blue Waves Academy, Qiu Yuan, suddenly stood up. He slightly bowed towards the woman in plain skirt and said, "Senior I." The plainly dressed woman suddenly looked at Qiu Yuan. "Did I allow you to speak?" As soon as she finished speaking, she waved her jade-like hand gently. Qiu Yuan's head flew off and blood spurted out like a fountain. Seeing this scene, everyone's expression changed. One after another, they rapidly retreated, but they didn't dare to leave. In the sky, the plainly dressed woman had her hands behind her back. She looked at the starry sky and after a moment, as if she thought of something, she turned around and looked at Yi Xian, who was not far away. To be precise, she was looking at the prison pagoda within Yi Xian's body. Looking at the 3 swords at the top of the pagoda, a trace of ripple appeared in her eyes. Clearly she seemed to have recalled something. At this moment in the starry sky, a powerful aura quietly condensed. Immediately after, an illusory figure suddenly appeared in the sky above Blue Sword Sect. Before that illusory figure could condense, the plainly dressed woman waved her right hand, and a ray of sword light flashed across the sky. That illusory figure directly shattered. The plainly dressed woman raised her head and looked at the depths of the starry sky. "Too weak. Send someone who can fight." Chapter 342. Too weak. There was complete silence. Even the white-robed man's face was filled with shock. Right now he was truly afraid. He hadn't expected the woman in the plain dress to be so powerful. The white-robed man wasn't the only one who hadn't expected this. Everyone present, including Yi Xian, hadn't expected the woman in the plain dress to be so terrifying. Because he'd never had a clear idea of the woman's strength. He didn't know how powerful she was either. At that moment, a voice suddenly came from the depths of the starry sky. "Who are you? Why have you come to the never-ending starfield?" The woman in the plain dress glanced at the starry sky. "I'm about to die. Why bother?" As soon as she finished speaking, she opened her right hand. In an instant, the surrounding wind suddenly gathered in her palm. Soon, a water-like sword appeared in her palm. The next moment, the sword shot up into the sky and into the vast starry sky. A moment later, a scream suddenly rang out in the distant starry sky. Then a bloody head slowly fell from the starry sky. Somewhere in the starry sky, a horrified voice suddenly rang out. She's the mysterious woman who's been rampaging through the starry sky. She's already killed more than 20 interstellar enforcers and interstellar officials. It's her. Why did she come to the never-ending starfield? She went to the Azure world. That's the territory of the Realm Defense Alliance. The Realm Defense Alliance is in big trouble now. Do you still care? The Realm Defense Alliance hands over a large number of purple origin crystals every year. How? Are we going to die? This person is so contemptuous of the never-ending starfield. Are we just going to let her? As soon as he said that, a sword beam suddenly flashed in the space in front of him. The next moment his head flew into the air. The other person next to him was stunned. Then he hurriedly bowed deeply. Senior, please do as you wish. We will not interfere in the affairs of the Realm Defense Alliance. After saying that, he bowed deeply again. After a moment of silence, a voice suddenly rang out in front of him. Scram. That person hurriedly turned around and disappeared. The Azure world. The woman in the plain dress withdrew her gaze and looked at the white-haired man who was not far away. The white-haired man who was already a soul body stared fixedly at her and was just about to speak when a strand of sword light suddenly pierced through the space between his brows. The white-haired man was stared at by the sword and was unable to move. The sword seemed to have some sort of strange power that was constantly devouring the white-haired man. The white-haired man said in horror, what are you doing? The woman waved her right hand, and the white-haired man's body suddenly turned into a ball of white light and appeared in her palm. In the next moment she turned around and lightly made a seal towards Yi Xian. The white light directly entered the space between Yi Xian's eyebrows. This. Yi Xian was a little confused. The woman in the plain dress said indifferently, your soul is on the weak side. This is for you. Yi Xian was speechless. After the white light entered his body, Yi Xian immediately felt a powerful force enter his body. Then his whole body began to tremble. Devouring a soul. Not far away, Lin Songyun looked at Yi Xian with slight envy. This white-haired man was extremely strong. How terrifying would the soul of such a person be? Yi Xian had devoured the white-haired man's soul. It was obvious to how strong Yi Xian's soul had become. At this moment, the woman in the plain dress suddenly turned around and looked at the surroundings. When they saw the woman in the plain dress looking over, the expressions of those people changed drastically. This chapter is not finished. Please continue. Retreat. Not far away, High Lord Lu suddenly walked out and bowed slightly. Senior, we are willing. Before he could finish speaking, a sword had already pierced through his throat. Fresh blood sprayed out from High Lord Lu's throat like a fountain, and he stared fixedly at the woman in the plain dress. The woman in the plain dress was expressionless. Today, no one who wants to kill him will live. As soon as she finished speaking, she pointed with a finger, and a strand of sword light shot out. In an instant, shrill cries resounded incessantly in the surroundings. Bloody heads flew out one after another, and the scene was extremely bloody. In next to no time, the heads of a few dozen true Imperial Dharma realm experts had been removed. On the other hand, Yi Xian, who was devouring, seemed to have thought of something, and he hurriedly pointed with his finger. The oblivion ring on his finger instantly flew out, and in an instant, those true Imperial Dharma realm experts in the surroundings transformed into strands of energy that converged towards the oblivion ring. The woman in the plain dress glanced at Yi Xian, but she didn't speak. At this moment, only the members of the Pale Sword sect remained in the surroundings. As if she'd thought of something, the woman suddenly appeared within the pagoda of prison within Yi Xian's body. She arrived at the top of the pagoda, and she fell silent as she gazed at the three swords at the top of the pagoda. Meanwhile, Xiao Linger suddenly floated over to the woman in the plain dress. The woman glanced at Xiao Linger, and Xiao Linger grinned brilliantly before he pointed at the three swords before him. The woman pointed at the sword on the far right and then she said, "It's mine." Xiao Linger blinked and then she pointed at the other two swords. The woman in the plain dress said softly, "It's from two old friends." After saying that, she brought Xiao Linger to the second floor. Inside the second floor, the great god on the second floor was exuding a powerful force. The woman in the plain dress gently pressed her right hand down, and the force exuding from the great god on the second floor immediately rushed back into his body. After a moment, the great god on the second floor opened his eyes. He looked at the woman in the plain dress and said softly, "Thank you." The woman in the plain dress said softly, "I've promised you before." The great god on the second floor nodded, but he didn't speak. The woman in the plain dress glanced at the great god on the second floor. "You're free." The great god on the second floor nodded, and was about to leave when the woman in the plain dress suddenly said, "You should know about this pagoda." The great god on the second floor hesitated and then said softly, "I know a little." The woman in the plain dress said calmly, "This thing is not simple. If it falls on him, although it represents countless troubles, it is also a great opportunity. Do you understand what I mean?" The great god on the second floor was silent. The woman in the plain dress said again, "With your ability, one more floor is your limit. If you stay in this pagoda, you can use this pagoda to have unlimited possibilities in the future. Of course, everything is up to you." The great god on the second floor glanced at the woman in the plain dress. "With you here, he will not be in danger." The woman in the plain dress shook her head. "This is not my body and this pagoda is sealed." The expression of the great god on the second floor was a little solemn, because Yi Xian had forcibly activated this pagoda before, and the seal in this pagoda could be said to be in pieces. The great god on the second floor said in a low voice, "You can directly kill them, can't you?" The woman in the plain dress looked up and shook her head. "This pagoda has been connected to his divine soul. They live and die as one. If you kill the people in the pagoda, the seal will definitely be broken, and if the seal is broken by force he will be hurt." The great god on the second floor understood. The woman in the plain dress was not worried about the people in the pagoda, but the pagoda. The woman in the plain dress looked at the great god on the second floor. "Think about it yourself." After saying that, she left the pagoda. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Outside the pagoda, Yi Xian was still frantically devouring, and the aura around his body was getting stronger and stronger, to the point that he could not hold on at this moment. Seeing this scene, the woman in the plain dress suddenly pressed her right hand on the top of Yi Xian's head. The next moment, a sword intent penetrated into Yi Xian's body, and soon the aura around Yi Xian gradually calmed down. The woman in the plain dress retracted her hand and said softly, "Your soul has been strengthened, but there is still a lot of soul power and the energy you just absorbed in your body. Your body can't completely absorb them now, so I have suppressed them in your body, and you can slowly absorb them in the future." Yi Xian nodded, "Understood." After saying that, he slowly clenched his hands. At this moment he felt that his body was full of strength, especially his soul, because the current him could already feel his own soul. However, he still did not understand much about the soul. The woman in the plain dress looked at Yi Xian, and as she looked, her expression gradually became a little complicated. Yi Xian said softly, "Senior, what do you think of me?" The woman in the plain dress turned to glance at the surroundings, and after a short moment she looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "I'm very worried about the pagoda within your body." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Senior, what exactly is this pagoda?" The woman in the plain dress shook her head. "This pagoda is extraordinary, and even I am unable to see through it. When I encountered it in the starry sky, I only knew that it imprisoned supreme experts of the heavens and the earth. According to my guess, it should be from a certain world." When she spoke up to here, she did not continue. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "What is it from a certain world?" The woman said softly, "You are still very weak now, and it is not beneficial for you to know some things about Tao Yi." Yi Xian smiled bitterly, "Look, I am already a sword immortal and I am not weak." The woman pointed at the horizon. "Do you know how big this world is?" Yi Xian shook his head. The woman pointed at Yi Xian's abdomen. "Do you know how strong those existences imprisoned in the pagoda are?" Yi Xian shook his head. The woman said softly, "Did you see that white-haired man from before?" Yi Xian nodded, "Very strong." The woman spoke indifferently, "All the existences imprisoned in your pagoda are much stronger than that white-haired man." Yi Xian was stunned, and then he hurriedly said, "The great god on the second floor is so strong as well?" The woman nodded, "Her strength hasn't fully recovered. Otherwise, no one in this world would be able to stop her." When she spoke up to here, she looked at Yi Xian. "Besides her, the few existences above are stronger than you can imagine." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and then he said, "Can I kill them?" The woman nodded, "Yes." Yi Xian was delighted in his heart, and he hurriedly said, "Kill all of them. Especially that fellow on the fourth floor. He is extremely bad." The woman continued, "I can kill them, but you have to die as well." Yi Xian was stunned and then he said, "Why?" The woman spoke indifferently, "They are still within the seal, and they are trapped and protected by the seal. If I want to kill them, then I have to break the seal by force. The seal is one with the pagoda, and you are one with the pagoda. Breaking the seal will cause damage to the pagoda, and you will definitely die." When she spoke up to here, she said softly, "So, I can only seal them." Don't you dare. Right at this moment, a furious howl suddenly resounded from within the pagoda. In an instant Yi Xian's head seemed to have suffered a heavy blow, and he fell to the ground. P.S. I have to keep a low profile for now. End of this chapter. Chapter 343. The moment Yi Xian fell, a hand pressed down on his shoulder. It was the woman's hand. The woman looked at Yi Xian's abdomen. In the next moment she entered Yi Xian's body. At this moment within Yi Xian's body the world prison pagoda was shaking. As the woman entered, the world prison pagoda returned to normal. The woman stood on top of the world prison pagoda. She looked down at the world prison pagoda and laughed coldly. I don't dare? If it wasn't for him, I would have killed all of you. As she spoke, she stamped her right foot. Bang! The entire world prison pagoda shook violently. Outside the world prison pagoda, Yi Xian felt the world spinning around him. Inside the pagoda, the woman looked down at the world prison pagoda expressionlessly. A bunch of trash. Inside the world prison pagoda, the voice rang out again. Woman, what are you being so arrogant for? If it wasn't for the fact that you were suppressed by this pagoda for thousands of years, I would have killed you with one hand. The woman said softly, if you aren't trash, why would you be suppressed? If it wasn't for the fear of hurting him, I would have killed all of you today. As she spoke, she left the world prison pagoda. Inside the world prison pagoda, roars rang out one after another. Damn woman, the day I leave the world prison pagoda will be the day you and this ant die. Outside the world prison pagoda, Yi Xian's face was filled with black lines. Was she talking about him? The woman looked at Yi Xian. Did you feel it? Yi Xian nodded. The woman said softly, what do you think? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. I don't think so. The woman said, walk with me. As she spoke, she turned and walked into the distance. Yi Xian followed. On the way the woman walked slowly. She didn't speak and just walked quietly. Yi Xian didn't speak either. At a riverside the two of them walked down the river. After a long while, the woman in the plain dress sat down on a rock. Yi Xian was standing quietly next to her. She looked at the distant horizon and said softly, do you know how long I've been searching for you? Yi Xian was taken aback. Looking for me? The plain-dressed woman turned to look at Yi Xian, and a hint of worry flashed in her eyes. You have a great treasure on you, but your strength is weak. My main body is too far away from this world, or perhaps I'm no longer in this universe. When she spoke up to this point, she lightly shook her head and softly said, as for that pagoda of yours, that pagoda is extraordinary as well. If those existences within the pagoda come out, they will definitely not let you go. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. I'm still in a terrible situation. The plain-dressed woman stood up. She opened her palm and a wisp of sword light suddenly floated out. The sword light floated into the starry sky and then disappeared into the depths of the starry sky. What's that? Yi Xian was puzzled. The woman in the plain dress said softly, contact two old friends as well as my main body and clone. If they see this strand of sword light, they will come and help you deal with the danger of the tower in your body. As for my main body and my clone, I can't sense them anymore. As she spoke up to this point, she solemnly said, you must remember to work hard to become stronger. This pagoda is an enormous fortune, but I can sense that it's also an enormous karma. If your strength isn't enough, then you won't have the fortune to possess it. Understand? Yi Xian nodded. Understood. When he spoke up to this point, he hesitated for a moment and said softly, are you leaving? The plain-dressed woman smiled lightly. Sort of. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly tapped the center of Yi Xian's forehead with a finger. In an instant, the rightmost sword at the top of the pagoda trembled violently. In the next moment, a wisp of sword light suddenly poured down from the top of the pagoda. A hysterical voice suddenly resounded from within the pagoda. Damnable woman! Do you think that you can protect him forever? Do you think that can you? The voice gradually weakened until it disappeared completely. Outside the pagoda, the plain-dressed woman's figure gradually became illusory. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was stunned, then he hurriedly said, You want to transform into sword chi like before to suppress this pagoda? The plain-dressed woman nodded. Yi Xian said softly, why are you so good to me? The plain-dressed woman smiled but didn't speak. Just like that, her body gradually became illusory. Just as she was about to completely disappear, she lightly touched Yi Xian's cheek. Live well. You must live well. Understand? As soon as she finished speaking, she completely disappeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian stood in place for a very very long time. Within the pagoda, as the wisp of sword light seeped into the pagoda, the entire pagoda became completely silent. The pagoda regained its calm once more. After a long time Yi Xian turned and left. Yi Xian returned to Pale Sword Sect. At this moment Pale Sword Sect was in a mess. Besides that, it could be said that 90% of the true law realm experts of Azure Firmament World had been lost today. As for the Realm Defense Alliance, they had been completely annihilated. Not a single one of them had won. In the distance, Enlancio and Enzytian walked over. Enzytian sized up Yi Xian, smiled slightly and didn't say anything. Enlancio walked in front of Yi Xian and said softly, "I'm leaving." "Returning to the Yin family?" Yi Xian asked. Enlancio shook her head. "Leaving the Azure Firmament World." Yi Xian was stunned. "Leaving the Azure Firmament World." Beside Enlancio, Enzytian smiled and said, "Above the Azure Firmament World, in other words in the Stellar Domain, there is an academy called God Academy. It is the best academy in our never-ending Stellar Domain." Little Lin received an invitation. This is an opportunity for her. God Academy. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, "Can I go too?" And Enzytian smiled and said, "With your talent you can naturally go." Yi Xian smiled and said, "All right. If there is a chance I will go and take a look." And Enzytian smiled faintly and didn't say anything. He naturally wouldn't interfere in the matter between Yi Xian and Enlancio because Yi Xian was sufficiently outstanding. Moreover, Yi Xian obviously had a great power behind him. Enlancio said softly in front of Yi Xian, "See you later." With that, she turned around and was about to leave. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, "Wait." Enlancio turned around and Yi Xian hurriedly took out a spear and passed it to her. This spear was none other than incineration. A superior grade heaven rank spear. Yi Xian grinned. "I obtained it by chance. I'll give it to you." Enlancio glanced at the spear and didn't refuse it. She put away incineration and played with it lightly before looking at Yi Xian. "Good spear." Yi Xian smiled and said, "It's good that you like it." Enlancio nodded slightly. "I like it." As she spoke, she glanced at Yi Xian and said, "The Profound Path has already recommended Yi Ling to God's First Academy." With that she turned around and left. And Enzytian glanced at Yi Xian and hesitated for a moment before he said, "If young friend wants to reconstruct Sword Immortal Yuqi's body, then it's best to make a trip to God's First Academy. Because it should be able to reconstruct Sword Immortal Yuqi's body there." Yi Xian said seriously, "Thank you for telling me." And Enzytian smiled lightly. "Farewell." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and vanished into the horizon. He's gone. God's First Academy? Yi Xian silently committed this academy to memory. Yi Xian turned around and walked over to Gu Shaoxian, who was sitting there silently. Her eyes were listless and it was unknown what she was thinking. Yi Xian walked over to Gu Shaoxian and said softly, "Martial Ant Gu." Gu Shaoxian looked at Yi Xian and said, "From now on, you are the sect leader of Blue Sword Sect." With that she turned around and left. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Martial Ant Gu, are you leaving Blue Sword Sect?" Gu Shaoxian stopped and said softly, "This is my home, I want to protect them." With that she walked into the distance. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then he walked over to Zhang Xian, who was not far away. Zhang Xian shook his head and said softly, "They're all gone, all gone." Yi Xian was silent. Although Blue Sword Sect had won, many people in Blue Sword Sect were no longer there. Qin Beihan, Jian Xian, Lian Bixian, Zhan Tai. Yi Xian stood on the spot for a long time. Suddenly, his gaze swept across the surroundings. "Pass down my order, all Blue Sword Sect disciples are to gather." As Yi Xian's voice faded, the surrounding Blue Sword Sect disciples quickly gathered. There were less than 100 people left in Blue Sword Sect. Less than 100. These were the last people in Blue Sword Sect. Yi Xian turned to face the crowd and said softly, "Is this over?" Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian raised his head to look at the sky. "This is not over. Today all those who came to destroy my Blue Sword Sect deserve to die. Go." With that Yi Xian brought Yi Xian to the Frost North Sect. When Yi Xian brought over 100 Blue Sword Sect disciples to the Frost North Sect, the expressions of everyone in the Frost North Sect changed drastically. Obviously they already knew about what happened in Blue Sword Sect. Outside the Frost North Sect, an old lady walked in front of Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "Yi Xian, my Frost North Sect." At this moment Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. The next moment the old lady's head was sent flying. Yi Xian was expressionless. Kill. As the sound of his voice faded, he directly rushed out. Behind him, over 100 Blue Sword Sect disciples also rushed out. Revenge. To Yi Xian, he would not let a single one of the forces that went to help the Blue Sword Sect of the Realm Defense Alliance off. And this Frost North Sect was only the first. Soon, screams rang out from within the Frost North Sect. Soon, countless cultivators of the Frost North Sect started to escape. But no one was faster than Yi Xian's sword. In the entire firmament world, there were not many who could stop Yi Xian. About an hour later, Yi Xian and the others stopped. All the cultivators in the Frost North Sect had been slaughtered. No, there was still one more. In front of the main hall of the Frost North Sect, Yi Xian held his sword and pointed it at the ground. Not far from him there were over a dozen girls. They were very young, about the same age as Yi Ling. They looked at Yi Xian and the others with fear in their eyes. Some of them were even trembling. Yi Xian was silent. At this moment, a girl suddenly said in a trembling voice, You are Yi Ling's brother?" Yi Xian looked at the girl. She shrank back and said in a trembling voice, Will you kill us?" Yi Xian turned to look at a Blue Sword Sect disciple. "If we lose, will they let the young disciples of my Blue Sword Sect go?" The disciple shook his head. Yi Xian said softly, "But we must let them go." Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, "Remember, we are humans, not beasts." As he spoke, he pointed his sword at the girls. "Many of you have hatred in your eyes. It's fine. If you want revenge in the future, my Blue Sword Sect welcomes you." After that, he led the people of the Blue Sword Sect and left. Chapter 344. Just like this, Yi Xian led the disciples of Blue Sword Sect and left Cold North Sect. Of course, when they left, all the treasures of Cold North Sect were taken away by Yi Xian. After leaving the frigid North Sect, Yi Xian brought everyone to the World Guardian Mountain. At this moment, Realm Protection Alliance was empty. Inside the Realm Protection Palace, Yi Xian looked around and was silent for a long time. Then he said softly, "Take everything away." An hour later, Yi Xian and others left Realm Protection Alliance. All the treasures of Realm Protection Alliance were taken away by Yi Xian and others. Yi Xian and others didn't return to Blue Sword Sect. Instead, they went to the next place. Sweep. Soon, all the forces that went to Blue Sword Sect to help Realm Protection Alliance disappeared one by one. Crazy revenge. Yi Xian led the disciples of Blue Sword Sect to take revenge. And the true Imperial Law Realm experts of these forces were basically killed by the mysterious woman. Therefore, none of the forces could resist Yi Xian and others. Soon Yi Xian led the disciples of Blue Sword Sect to the last force. Blue Waves Academy. In the sky above Blue Waves Academy, an old man blocked in front of Yi Xian and others. This person was the master of Ji Yun. The old man looked at Yi Xian and others with a complicated expression. "Can you let Blue Waves Academy go for the sake of little Yun?" Yi Xian shook his head. "Sorry, this time I represent Blue Sword Sect." As he finished speaking, he pressed his right hand down. "Kill?" Following Yi Xian's voice, the disciples of Blue Sword Sect behind him all rushed towards Blue Waves Academy. In front of Yi Xian, the expression of the old man changed. He was about to attack when a sword was already at his forehead. The old man looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, "If you want to die, then do it." The old man stared at Yi Xian without saying a word. Half an hour later, Yi Xian left Blue Waves Academy along with the disciples of Blue Sword Sect. In the air, the old man looked at the corpses on the ground with a trace of sorrow in his eyes. At that time, when Blue Waves Academy wanted to target Yi Xian, he strongly opposed it. However, Qiu Yuan believed that Yi Xian would lose without a doubt. One wrong decision and the 1,000-year inheritance of Blue Waves Academy was destroyed in a day. A moment later, the old man sighed softly, turned around and left. Blue Sword Sect. Yi Xian brought everyone back to the Ashen Sword Sect. Right now, the 6 peaks of the Ashen Sword Sect had already collapsed. It was a complete mess. Looking at the Azure Sword Sect in front of them, the expressions of the people behind Yi Xian dimmed. Many people were no longer around. At this time, Yi Xian said softly, "Do a head count and settle the dead." Behind him, a disciple of the Azure Sword Sect slightly bowed. "Understood." After speaking, he turned around and left with a group of people. Yi Xian arrived at what used to be the Cloudy Sword Peak. All that was left of this place was ruins. Yi Xian sat on the ruins. He just sat there for the whole night. Many people were missing. Qin Beihan, Jian Xian, Lian Bixian, Zhan Tai, and Yu Qi. Thinking of this, Yi Xian quickly entered the prison pagoda. Inside the prison pagoda, Yi Xian arrived in front of Yu Qi's soul. At this moment, Yu Qi's soul was wrapped in a sword light. Reconstruct the body. Yu Qi's problem was not only reconstructing the body, he also needed to repair his soul. Although it was an extremely troublesome matter, as long as there was hope, it was good. Daoi Academy. This chapter is not finished, please continue. Thinking of this, Yi Xian left the prison pagoda. He had to settle the matters in Azure World as soon as possible, then go to Daoi Academy. To rebuild Azure Sword Sect, what he needed the most was money. And now Yi Xian had no lack of money. It could be said that he was the richest person in Azure World. One should know that those forces that he had gone to take revenge on were not ordinary forces. The wealth of those forces was in his hands. All kinds of treasures, spirit stones, he had lost count. Yi Xian searched for a few more mountain ranges within the territory of Azure Sword Sect. Very quickly, a palace was erected on top of these mountains. As for Yi Xian, he returned to Azure Province. After returning to Azure Province, the first thing Yi Xian did was to send out a summon order. Very quickly, the former students of Azure Waves Academy returned to Azure Waves Academy. In front of Azure Waves Palace, Yi Xian sat quietly. One by one, people came to him and bowed deeply. Now, not far from him, there were more than 20 people standing. All of them were former students of Azure Waves Academy. At this moment, the sound of the earth trembling came from afar. Yi Xian raised his head and looked. Not far from the foot of the mountain, more than 100 cavalrymen were rushing over. Azure Waves Dao soldiers. These Azure Waves Dao soldiers were very fast. In the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of Azure Waves Palace. 100 of them dismounted and knelt down on one knee in front of Yi Xian. Greetings, Dean. Everyone's voice was filled with excitement and agitation. They had waited for this day for a long time. Yi Xian said softly, "Get up." As soon as he said that, more than 100 people stood up and quietly stood to the side. At this moment, a beautiful figure suddenly flashed in the distance. Very quickly, a woman appeared in front of Yi Xian. Jiangjiu. Jiangjiu looked at Yi Xian. Suddenly, she stretched out her jade-like finger and gently lifted Yi Xian's chin. "Do you still remember me?" Yi Xian stood up. He gently hugged Jiangjiu and said softly, "Little Jiu." Hearing this, Jiangjiu's delicate body trembled slightly. Very quickly, she wrapped her arms around Yi Xian's waist. "I thought you weren't coming back." Yi Xian smiled. "Why would I?" After saying that, he looked behind Jiangjiu. Behind Jiangjiu stood 10 people. These 10 people were the 10 people that he had selected previously. And at this moment, these 10 people were already in the Dharma Defensive Realm. Dharma Defensive Realm. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was a little shocked. Jiangjiu suddenly smiled. "Are you a little shocked?" Yi Xian nodded. Jiangjiu turned to look at the 10 people. Her expression was cold. "Greetings, Dean." The 10 people looked at Yi Xian. No one moved. Seeing this scene, Jiangjiu frowned slightly. At this moment, Yi Xian smiled. "They are getting arrogant." As his voice fell, he had already disappeared. The next moment, bam bam bam. Before everyone's eyes, the 10 people were sent flying hundreds of feet away. The 10 people struggled on the ground for a long time before slowly getting up. Seeing this scene, everyone around was shocked, especially the 10 people. One should know that they were already in the Dharma Defensive Realm. It could be said that they were the top powerhouses in Qingzhou. However, they did not expect that in front of Yi Xian, they did not even have the ability to fight back. Jiangjiu was also shocked. She knew that Yi Xian had become stronger, but she did not expect him to be this strong. As if thinking of something, she turned to look at the 10 people. "Greetings, Dean." The 10 people slowly stood up. Just as they were about to bow, a powerful sword will suddenly shrouded them. This chapter is not finished, please continue. The 10 people were stopped. In an instant, the 10 people knelt on the ground. Yi Xian slowly walked in front of the 10 people. "What? If I am not strong, you won't recognize me?" The 10 people were sweating profusely and did not speak. Yi Xian was expressionless. He lightly stomped his right foot. Boom. The 10 people sprawled on the ground. At the same time, everyone's bones were cracking. Yi Xian said calmly, "How did you achieve what you have today?" At this moment, one of them said in a trembling voice, "It was given by the dean." Yi Xian was expressionless. "And then?" The person hurriedly said, "We know our mistakes. Please forgive us, Dean." Yi Xian shook his head and turned to look at Jiangjiu not far away. "Their strength has increased, but I am very dissatisfied with their character. Therefore, I have decided to take back everything they have. As for their cultivation, consider it as a gift from me." When he finished, he turned to look at the 10 people. You are free. Hearing this, the 10 people's expressions changed drastically. The 10 people hurriedly begged, but Yi Xian had already turned and left. Not far away, Jiang Jiu glanced at the 10 people. His expression was rather complicated. You think that you are already the strongest in Qingzhou after reaching magic defending realm. You think that he needs to rely on you, needs you more than you need him. Therefore you don't respect him like before. Unfortunately, you didn't expect that he is even stronger than you. He is so strong that you can only look up to him. Speaking until here, she slightly paused and then continued, from today onwards you are free. In the future, no one will provide you with cultivation resources, and no one will come to nurture you. When she finished speaking, she turned and left. Behind Jiang Jiu, the faces of the 10 people instantly turned pale. Without cultivation resources, this was undoubtedly fatal for them. Because they could grow up to now because they only needed to cultivate and didn't need to care about anything else. But now they didn't have this treatment. In the distance, those Blue Waves Academy students and Blue Waves Dao soldiers glanced at the 10 people, then turned and left. To them, Yi Xian was supreme. Moreover, their respect towards Yi Xian wasn't just because of Yi Xian's formidable strength, it was also because of everything Yi Xian had done for them. Yi Xian stood silently within Blue Wave's palace while Jiang Jiu stood behind him. Jiang Jiu glanced at Yi Xian and asked softly, "Why are you so angry?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I'm not angry, but they've already become arrogant. I don't need arrogant people. If I leave them alive, then all of you won't be able to suppress them when I'm not around." Not around? Jiang Jiu's beautiful brows knit together slightly. You're leaving Azure Prefecture? Yi Xian shook his head. Not Azure Prefecture. I'm leaving the Firmament World. Leaving the Firmament World? Jiang Jiu's frown deepened. You're leaving the Firmament World? Yi Xian nodded. This time I'm taking you to the Central Divine Prefecture. Everyone will be able to develop better there. Jiang Jiu said solemnly, then Azure Prefecture, Yi Xian said softly, naturally we can't give up. We'll leave some people here and let them continue recruiting. Jiang Jiu thought for a moment, then nodded. That's fine. Yi Xian smiled faintly, then went to the Martyr's Palace with Jiang Jiu. Inside the palace, Yi Xian walked to Ji Yun's memorial tablet. A moment later he said softly, Old Ji, Blue Waves Academy will soon become the largest academy in the firmament world. At this time he frowned slightly, then took out a sound transmission stone. Soon a voice came from it. Something happened to the ancient Wu clan. P.S. Low profile, continue to be low profile. Wait until I erupt, then I'll be high profile. End of this chapter. Chapter 345. Something had happened to the ancient Wu clan. Yi Xian frowned. After a moment of silence, he turned to look at Jiang Jiu. I have to return to the Divine Central Continent. Bring the Blue Waves Academy disciples and Dao soldiers to the Divine Central Continent later. Jiang Jiu nodded and said softly, Be careful. Yi Xian nodded. You too. With that, he disappeared on the spot. Not long after Yi Xian left, a woman came to Blue Waves Academy. She was the ruler of Ning country, Tuoba Yen. After learning that Yi Xian had left, Tuoba Yen stood in silence for a long time before turning to leave. Yi Xian immediately rushed to the ancient Wu clan after returning to the Divine Central Continent. When he arrived at the Wu clan, his expression changed. There was no one alive in the entire Wu clan. Yi Xian hurriedly looked around, but he did not see Wei Yangtian anywhere. Zhang Xian appeared behind Yi Xian. He glanced at the corpses on the ground and said in a low voice, The ancient Wu clan has been exterminated. Yi Xian's expression was cold. Do you know who did it? Zhang Xian shook his head. Besides the Realm Defense Alliance, only the Celestial Gate can do this silently. The Realm Defense Alliance is obviously impossible. As for the Celestial Gate, they have no reason to attack the ancient Wu clan. Yi Xian said in a low voice, If it's not them, who else could it be? Zhang Xian looked around. Could there be another mysterious force in the Azure world? He shook his head. It's unlikely. If there is such a force, it would be impossible to hide from my Blue Sword sect and the Realm Defense Alliance. If it's not a force from the Azure world, it could be a force outside the Azure world. Outside the Azure world. Yi Xian seemed to think of something. He hurriedly took out a voice transmission stone and contacted Wei Tian. After a while, a low voice came from it. Who is it? It wasn't Endless Heaven's voice. Yi Xian's face darkened. Who are you? Where is the girl? After a moment of silence, the other side said, Scram. As soon as he finished speaking, there was no movement from the other side. In the field, Yi Xian's expression was terrifyingly dark. After a while he suddenly felt that unending sky should be fine. That was because this girl had always been very mysterious. She was definitely not an ordinary person, and this unforeseen event was very likely related to her. Moments later Yi Xian softly said, "Teacher Uncle Tsang Xian, pass down my order. Help me find someone. She's called Wei Yang Tian." Tsang Xian nodded. "All right." With that he turned around and left. In a certain part of the starry sky, 9 giant dragons that were nearly 10,000 feet long were dragging a dragon chariot as they soared through the sky. Each of the giant dragons was emanating a dragon's might that could destroy the heavens and the earth. A little girl was sitting cross-legged on the dragon chariot. If Yi Xian was here he would definitely be extremely shocked because this little girl was Wei Yang Tian. There were 30 people around her, all dressed in white robes and wielding black staffs. Every one of them gave off an unfathomable aura. After an unknown period of time, Wei Yang Tian suddenly opened her eyes. There was a trace of confusion in her eyes, but they gradually cleared up. After a while she seemed to think of something and turned to look in a certain direction. At this moment, a white-robed man not far away suddenly bowed respectfully. "Is there something the Heaven Master needs?" Wei Yang Tian withdrew her gaze and softly said, "It's just a strand of distracting thoughts in the cycle of reincarnation." The white-robed man bowed again and said, "Do you need me to sever it for the Heaven Master?" Wei Yang Tian coldly glared at the white-robed man. Scram. The white-robed man's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly and respectfully retreated to the side. Just like that, the group headed into the depths of the distant starry sky. Gradually, the group completely disappeared into the boundless starry sky. Azure World. In the current Azure World, it could be said that Azure Sword Sect was the sole power, because in the entire Azure World, other than Celestial Gate, there was no other force that could contend against Azure Sword Sect. And Celestial Gate was a force that basically did not appear in the world, so in the entire Azure World, Azure Sword Sect could be said to be the strongest force. And Jiang Jiao had also brought the Dao soldiers and students of Azure Waves Academy to the Central Plains, and now the headquarters of Azure Waves Academy was in Sky Cloud City. This Sky Cloud City used to belong to the Realm Defense Alliance, but now it belonged to him, Yi Xian. Not only that, Yi Xian also called Ling Han, Ji Banzwang and the others to Sky Cloud City. In a large hall, Yi Xian looked at Ling Han and the others in front of him and smiled slightly. "Long time no see." Ling Han and the others looked at Yi Xian, and their faces were full of smiles. Now Yi Xian's reputation in Azure Province could be said to be like the midday sun. Really like the midday sun. Now in the entire Azure Province, no one's reputation could be compared to Yi Xian's. Yi Xian smiled. "I called you all here, other than to reminisce about the past, there's another matter, and that is I'm about to leave Azure World." Leave Azure World. Everyone was stunned. Ji Banzwang frowned slightly. "To the galaxy?" Yi Xian nodded. "I still have many things to do, so in a few days at most, I will leave Azure World." "Where are you going?" Ling Han suddenly asked. Yi Xian smiled. "Dao Yi Academy. This academy seems to be the best academy in our galaxy. You have to cultivate well and in the future, come to this academy to look for me, understand?" Ling Han smiled bitterly. "I'm afraid we don't have that ability." Yi Xian shook his head. "Your talent is not bad, the only thing you lack is Purple Source. In my Blue Waves Academy, you don't have to worry about cultivating Purple Source, you can cultivate with peace of mind. I believe in no time you will all reach the true Imperial Law tier." He wasn't being polite because these people in front of him were indeed very talented, especially Ling Han and Ji Banzwang. These two were already at the peak of the true Imperial Law tier, and Yi Xian was only half a step into the true Imperial Law tier. Besides them, Mo Yunqi, Bai Zhe and Ji Anji were also very talented. As long as they had enough cultivation resources, reaching the true Imperial Law tier was not a problem at all. One day later, after Yi Xian explained everything, he returned to Azure Sword Sect. In the rebuilt Azure Sword Hall, there were only 3 people, Yi Xian, Tsang Xian and Gu Xiaoxian. Tsang Xian looked at Yi Xian and said in a low voice, "Why don't you wait a few more years before going to Dao Yi Academy?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't have that much time to wait." He hadn't forgotten what the plain-dressed woman had told him. He had to work hard to become stronger because although the World Prison Tower was peaceful now, he knew that this was only temporary. He couldn't rely on the plain-dressed woman forever. Apart from that, he still had to help Yu Qi reconstruct his physical body, and this matter couldn't be delayed. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Song Xian hesitated for a moment, and then sighed in a low voice. You are now the sect master of Azure Sword Sect. Yi Xian said, I want to give the position of sect master to the two martial uncles. Song Xian hurriedly shook his head. No, you are the sect master appointed by the sect master. Apart from you, no one else can be the sect master of Azure Sword Sect. Gu Shaoxian also nodded slightly. You are the sect master of Azure Sword Sect now. Even if you go to Dao Yi Academy, you will still be the sect master of Azure Sword Sect. Yi Xian still wanted to say something, but Gu Shaoxian glanced at him. This is your responsibility. Don't say any more, understand? Yi Xian smiled bitterly and nodded. All right. Gu Shaoxian nodded. When are you leaving? Yi Xian smiled. My matters are almost settled. I'm almost done, so I'll leave tomorrow. Gu Shaoxian glanced at Yi Xian. Remember to bring her back. Yi Xian solemnly said, I will. At night, Yi Xian left Azure Sword Sect, but he didn't leave. Instead, he returned to Qingzhou. There was still someone he wanted to see. Ning Country, Tuoba Yan's bedroom. Tuoba Yan, who was reading the memorials, suddenly raised her head. A man was standing not far from her. It was Yi Xian. Tuoba Yan retracted her gaze and continued reading. Yi Xian walked in front of Tuoba Yan. I am leaving Azure World. Tuoba Yan's hand trembled slightly. She didn't raise her head and continued reading the memorials. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then turned and left. He was very fast and silently disappeared from the hall. Tuoba Yan suddenly looked up. When she saw that the hall was empty, she was stunned. Soon she got up and walked out of the hall. It was also empty outside. Tuoba Yan was stunned for a long time. Suddenly, a voice sounded in her ear. Looking for me? It was Yi Xian's voice. Tuoba Yan leaned into Yi Xian's arms and asked softly, Are you leaving? Yi Xian nodded. I am leaving Azure World. Tuoba Yan asked, Are you coming back? Yi Xian said, Yes. When? I don't know. Tuoba Yan fell silent. Yi Xian asked softly, Are you leaving with me? Tuoba Yan shook her head. As long as you return it. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then nodded. Okay. An hour later, Yi Xian was about to leave when Tuoba Yan suddenly said softly, Stay here tonight. Yi Xian was stunned, then grinned. Okay. A night of singing in the spring breeze. The next day at dawn, Yi Xian left Ning Nation. This time, Yi Xian didn't return to the divine central continent. He found Drunken Immortal Inn and took a small nebula warship toward outer space. On the nebula warship, Yi Xian looked back down. Azure World was getting smaller and smaller. He was leaving just like that. Yi Xian had a complicated feeling. He didn't expect to leave Azure Province and Azure World. When would he return? Yi Xian shook his head. He didn't know when he would return, but he was sure that he would. After a long time, the nebula warship entered the starry sky. This was Yi Xian's first time entering the starry sky. Looking at the endless starry sky, Yi Xian once again felt how insignificant he was. Insignificant. In the face of this vast universe, humans were insignificant. At this moment, a nebula warship suddenly appeared in the distant starry sky. It was extremely fast and arrived before Yi Xian's nebula warship in the blink of an eye. A middle-aged man flew out of the nebula warship and looked down at Yi Xian. Are you from Azure World? Yi Xian nodded. Yes, you are? The middle-aged man said coldly, Is Yi Xian in Azure World? Yi Xian was stunned, then asked, Are you looking for Yi Xian? The middle-aged man frowned. You know Yi Xian? Yi Xian nodded. I've heard of him. May I know why you are looking for him? The middle-aged man said calmly. I heard that he has the top item on the interstellar bounty list, so I want to borrow it from him. Hearing this, Yi Xian's face darkened. Chapter 346. Interstellar Bounty List. Yi Xian's face was gloomy. He knew that the news of the World Prison Pagoda must have spread. At this moment, the middle-aged man suddenly said, When I mentioned Yi Xian, your expression changed slightly. Why, are you familiar with him? Or are you Yi Xian? Hearing this, Yi Xian raised his head to look at the middle-aged man. Do I look like Yi Xian? The middle-aged man sized up Yi Xian. Rumor has it that Yi Xian is a swordsman and a sword immortal. And you, I feel sword intent on you. You are also a swordsman, right? Yi Xian smiled and said, Yes. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes. So, you are Yi Xian? Yi Xian nodded, Yes. Seeing Yi Xian admit it, the middle-aged man's mouth curled up slightly. It seems that my luck is not bad. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Then what are you going to do now?" The middle-aged man's smile widened. "Guess?" Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, "Seize the treasure and then kill to silence them." The middle-aged man was stunned, then laughed and said, "You guessed it right." As his voice fell, his entire body disappeared on the spot. Yi Xian suddenly heard a "chi" sound, and then he felt a powerful pressure envelop him. Void-piercing realm. If it was before, it would definitely be very difficult for him to face a void-piercing realm powerhouse. But now, after devouring the soul of the Realm Protector Alliance leader and those powerhouses, he no longer felt any pressure when facing a void realm powerhouse. Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword light flashed and the sword was sheathed. The sound of blood spurting suddenly rang out. The scene quieted down. Yi Xian was already behind the middle-aged man, and at this moment, blood spurted out from the middle-aged man's throat. The middle-aged man looked ahead sluggishly and murmured, "You are actually so strong." Behind the middle-aged man, Yi Xian said, "It's my fault." Middle-aged man. Yi Xian took out the ethereal execution ring, and soon the middle-aged man was directly absorbed by Yi Xian. Yi Xian found that the ethereal execution ring's function was to absorb soul, spirit power and energy from the human body. It had to be said that this was against the natural order of the world. Of course, he wouldn't intentionally devour others for the sake of cultivation. As for the enemies who wanted to kill him, no matter how cruel they were to him, Yi Xian would not go overboard. The star cloud warship Yi Xian was on continued its journey. On the nebula ship, Yi Xian counted the spirit stones and treasures he had. Currently he had no less than 1 million purple origin crystals. He had exchanged all the best quality spirit stones for purple origin crystals. As for treasures and cultivation techniques, he had left most of them to Blue Waves Academy and Blue Sword Sect. Currently he had 4 heaven-ranked swords. As for the rest of the heaven-grade treasures, there were a total of 13. As for those below heaven rank, he left all of them to Blue Waves Academy and Blue Sword Sect. Currently he didn't have many things but they were the best. Moreover, he had left a large portion for Blue Waves Academy and Blue Sword Sect. Otherwise he would have left even more. Several tens of thousands of violet origin crystals were enough to buy a heaven-ranked spirit artifact. Hence, with 1 million violet origin crystals, he could be said to be extremely wealthy. In terms of cultivation, he was now at the peak of the true Imperial Dharma realm, a sword immortal. Other than that, he had not completely absorbed the experts he had devoured. It could be said that once he completely absorbed them, his strength would definitely increase greatly. Needless to say, in the firmament world, he was one of the strongest cultivators. However, Yi Xian knew very well that he would not be able to afford it. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. The enemy was not in the firmament world but in this tower, and those who coveted this tower and those bastards in the tower. To these people he was still weak. He still needed to work hard. Daoi Academy. Yi Xian raised his head and looked into the distance. In the distance there was a vast and boundless starry sky. After leaving the firmament world, to him, the starry sky in front of him was a whole new world. At this moment an old man appeared beside Yi Xian. The old man bowed to Yi Xian. "Young Master Yi, there are still 10 days until we reach the Daoi Academy. During this period we might encounter a chaotic starry sky, so, young Master Yi, please be careful." Yi Xian nodded, "I will be careful." The old man bowed, turned around and left. Yi Xian returned to his room and entered the prison pagoda. As soon as he entered the pagoda, Xiao Linger floated in front of him. She grinned and extended her hand. Yi Xian smiled, then took out 2 spirit fruits and handed them to Xiao Linger. Seeing the spirit fruits, Xiao Linger's eyes lit up and she hugged the fruits. After sending Xiao Linger away, Yi Xian went to the 2nd floor. In the 2nd floor, the Almighty on the 2nd floor was still there. The Almighty on the 2nd floor glanced at Yi Xian but did not speak. Yi Xian walked to the Almighty on the 2nd floor. Was it the one on the 4th floor who spoke in the pagoda? He did not forget that when the woman in the plain dress was around, there was a voice in the pagoda that resisted her. Moreover, that person had threatened to kill him. The Almighty on the 2nd floor shook his head. "Above, but I do not know which floor it is." "Even higher up." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "I am the pagoda master now. Can I kill him?" The Almighty on the 2nd floor said calmly, "What kind of dream are you having in broad daylight?" Yi Xian, the Almighty on the 2nd floor continued, "Unless the pagoda is completely restored and you have full control of it, then the life and death of all the creatures in the pagoda will be in your hands." Yi Xian shook his head and sighed, feeling somewhat helpless. He had no idea when the pagoda would be restored, and he did not know when he would be able to truly control the pagoda. The only thing he knew was that those guys in the pagoda wanted to kill him. And those who wanted the pagoda would also come to kill him. As if knowing what Yi Xian was thinking, the Almighty on the second floor said coldly, "Do you know how many people in this world want this pagoda? And ask yourself, after getting this pagoda, did you change your fate?" Yi Xian thought about it. If not for this pagoda, his and Yi Ling's fates would have been very miserable. Although he had worked hard along the way, it was undeniable that without this bit of luck, it would have been very difficult for him to reach this step today. The Almighty on the second floor said, "This pagoda has been suppressed by her, but you must remember in the future, do not activate this pagoda at will. Otherwise, if the pagoda's seal breaks, your soul will be seriously injured. In addition, once those guys come out, they will definitely kill you and take your treasures." Yi Xian said softly, "I am carrying a volcano with me." The Almighty on the second floor said calmly, "Be content." With that, she slowly closed her eyes. Yi Xian hesitated, then said, "Well, when will your injuries heal?" The Almighty on the second floor did not answer. Yi Xian was speechless and did not ask again, leaving the prison pagoda. Inside the room, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the bed, his eyes closed, stabilizing his cultivation. He had not reached the true defensive law stage for long and had not completely stabilized his cultivation. Otherwise he could have obtained a sword. This chapter is not finished, please continue. He continued to break through. Not long after Yi Xian left the firmament world, a dozen people suddenly arrived at the firmament sword sect of the divine central continent, led by a middle-aged man. The dozen people had just arrived at the firmament sword sect when Song Xian appeared in front of them. Song Xian glanced at the dozen people and said in a low voice, "You are?" The middle-aged man said indifferently, "Is Yi Xian in the firmament sword sect?" Song Xian frowned slightly. "You are looking for him?" The middle-aged man nodded. Song Xian said in a low voice, "He is no longer in the firmament sword sect." The middle-aged man frowned. "Then where is he?" Song Xian glanced at the middle-aged man and the others and said in a low voice, "You are looking for him?" The middle-aged man smiled. "To ask him some questions." Song Xian nodded. "He has already left the firmament world. As for where he went, I do not know." Left the firmament world. The middle-aged man's frown deepened when he heard this. A short while later, the middle-aged man led the dozen people away. There was a trace of worry in Song Xian's eyes as he gazed at the middle-aged man and the others. Because this wasn't the first group to come looking for Yi Xian. It was the 9th group. All of them had come to look for Yi Xian. Moreover, all of them were void-piercing stage experts. A short while later, Song Xian sighed softly, turned around and left. On the other side, the middle-aged man and the others didn't leave the firmament world immediately after they left. The middle-aged man glanced at the dozen people beside him, and they quickly turned around and left. Around 2 hours later, the dozen people returned to the middle-aged man's side. An old man walked over to the middle-aged man and said in a low voice, "We have investigated clearly. Yi Xian has indeed left the firmament world." Left the firmament world. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment, and then he said, "We must find this person. We can't let this pagoda fall into the hands of others. Send my orders. Have our people put down whatever they are doing and focus on finding this person." The old man nodded slightly. Understood. Soon, the dozen people left the firmament world. Not long after they left the firmament world, a black-clothed man suddenly arrived at the firmament sword sect. Within the firmament sword hall, Song Xian looked at the black-clothed man in front of him. "Are you also here to look for Yi Xian?" The black-clothed man said in a low voice, "He is not in the firmament sword sect?" Song Xian nodded. "He has left." The black-clothed man fell silent. Song Xian glanced at the black-clothed man. "You are?" The black-clothed man said softly, "I am here to pick him up." Song Xian was slightly surprised. "Pick him up?" The black-clothed man nodded. "To bring him back to the Dugu family." Song Xian was slightly puzzled. "Dugu family? I think his surname is Yi." The black-clothed man shook his head. "He has the bloodline of my Dugu family. This time I have specially come to bring him back to the Dugu family." Song Xian wanted to ask more, but the black-clothed man had already turned around and left. Outside the firmament sword sect, the black-clothed man sighed softly. "It's good that he left." As he said this, he seemed to have thought of something and his brows furrowed deeply. The family knows that he has a great treasure, but they don't know that he has a supreme expert behind him. Moreover, young Miss is still imprisoned in the endless purgatory. I'm afraid that something big will happen in the future. In the same place, the black-clothed man was silent for a long time. After a long time he said again, "No, we must find him. Only he can save young Mississippi." After saying this, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon. P.S. Let me ask you something. If your body is weak, what should you eat? Serious disclaimer, I am asking for the readers. End of this chapter. That you're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.